Today we're venturing deep into the heart of Texas, where the land is as vast as its legends and just as terrifying. From eerie lights haunting dark rivers to ancient forces that never should have been disturbed, get ready for 20 of the most disturbing true Texas highway horror stories that will make you question what's real and what's lurking just beyond the horizon. But before we begin, here's something strange. Most viewers make one huge mistake. They leave without subscribing. And by doing so, they miss out on the creepiest, spine-tingling tales that only the bravest dare to hear. Don't be one of them. Hit that subscribe button now, because tonight's just the beginning and the terror waiting in the darkness is far from over. So, where are you watching from? And what time is it there? Let me know in the comments, because here the night is only getting started, and the horror is waiting to unfold. Now let's dive into the darkness. The night was already heavy when Nathan pulled his car off the endless stretch of highway and into the rest stop at mile 187. He had been driving since dusk, eyes raw from staring at the blinding beams of oncoming trucks and the fading white lines of asphalt that stretched out like threads unraveling into nowhere. He wasn't even sure what part of Texas he was in anymore. The signs had long since stopped registering. His mind was foggy from cheap gas station coffee and the kind of exhaustion that makes your bones feel hollow. He just knew he needed to get out, to stretch his legs, and to rest his eyes before he lost control of the wheel. The rest stop looked as if it had been forgotten by the state years ago. The lights in the parking lot flickered weakly, some buzzing, some already burnt out. A single bathroom building sat off to the side, its bricks stained dark by years of dust and rain. The painted sign that once welcomed travelers had peeled so badly that the words were more ghost than ink. Only one thing seemed alive in the entire place: the vending machine. It stood near the bathroom door, tilted slightly on the cracked pavement, its plastic front panel glowing faintly. Nathan thought it odd because the power lines overhead were long dead, the bathroom dark, and the few street lamps that worked buzzed with the sound of dying insects. Yet the vending machine hummed softly, almost musically, as if it were breathing. He parked close, stepping out into the warm night air, and immediately heard it, just under the hum. A faint whisper. Not words exactly, more like the suggestion of them carried on the machine's drone. His scalp prickled. He told himself it was his imagination, the way exhaustion bends the edges of reality. But he couldn't stop staring at the glowing red numbers of the digital display. Nathan approached, each step crunching the gravel under his boots. The closer he got, the clearer the whispers seemed. It was like a group of people, murmuring together behind a wall, their voices pressed too close to hear distinctly. He leaned down, pressing his ear almost to the glass, and for a brief second it stopped. The hum, the whispers, everything cut into silence. Then the machine clunked loudly like something shifting inside, and the voices started again, sharper this time, clearer. He jerked back. His heart hammered. There were words now. A woman's voice saying, "Let me out." A child's voice whispering, "Hungry." And beneath them both, low and guttural, a man's voice rumbling, "Stay." The air seemed heavier suddenly, hotter. Nathan's throat dried. He turned to walk back to his car, but his feet didn't move. He was still staring at the faint glow of candy bars and sodas inside the machine. They were old, wrapped in packaging that looked 2 decades outdated, the sort of thing he remembered from when he was a kid, but with colors faded and edges curling. The whispers rose again, urgent, pulling him closer. His hand lifted without him deciding it should, fingers brushing the cold glass. Static shot through his arm, making him flinch, but instead of pain there was a rush of sound in his head. Screams, metal twisting, glass shattering, the wail of brakes on asphalt, a crash that never ended, then silence again, leaving only the hum. Nathan staggered back. He looked around, half expecting someone else to be there watching him, but the parking lot was empty. A few moths circled a flickering light, and far off on the highway the glow of a truck passed like a comet. He should have left then, gotten in his car and driven until daylight, but curiosity or madness, maybe both, rooted him in place. He fished a crumpled dollar bill from his wallet, smoothing it against his leg before feeding it into the slot. The machine swallowed it greedily, its gears clicking. The voices hushed. He pressed a button at random, some unidentifiable snack wrapped in faded foil, and waited. For a long moment nothing happened. Then with a slow groan, the coil inside turned, dropping the package into the bin. When Nathan reached in, His hand brushed something warm, not cold. He pulled out the package and saw that it was damp. The foil was sticky with a dark residue. His stomach twisted as he realized it wasn't candy at all. The wrapping peeled back with a wet sound, revealing something raw, flesh-like, pulsing faintly in the glow. The voices rose into laughter, shrill and mad. He dropped it, stumbling back, his chest tight with panic. The thing hit the ground with a sickening thud and dissolved into nothing, leaving only a black stain on the pavement. He turned to run, but the bathroom door creaked open slowly. Though no light came from within, a shadow stretched across the cracked concrete, too tall, too thin, bending unnaturally as if it wasn't tied to a real body. Nathan froze. His legs wouldn't respond, like the air itself held him still. From inside the bathroom came the sound of dripping water, steady and slow, followed by a voice, his own voice, calling out, "Don't leave me." The vending machine roared to life, its hum swelling into a deep, vibrating growl that rattled his teeth. The glass fogged from inside, shapes pressing against it, hands, faces, mouths wide in silent screams. They pushed harder, smearing the glass with dark streaks. The machine shook violently as if straining to release them. Nathan broke free of whatever invisible grip held him and sprinted for his car. He fumbled with the handle, throwing himself inside, slamming the lock. His fingers shook as he turned the key, the engine coughing before finally roaring to life. He tore out of the lot, gravel spraying, tires screeching. In his mirror, the vending machine glowed brighter, a beacon in the dark, the glass bulging outward as if it would burst. The bathroom door stood wide now, shadows spilling across the lot like ink. And for just a second, he thought he saw people standing there. Men, women, children, all staring at him, their mouths moving in whispers he could no longer hear. He drove until sunrise, never stopping, never daring to glance at another rest stop. But in the weeks that followed, he noticed a sound whenever the car was quiet. At first it was faint, like the hum of distant machinery. Then came the whispers, building in the silence, pressing closer. At night, when he stopped in motel rooms along the way, the voices grew louder, crowding into his ears, whispering of hunger and of staying forever. The last thing Nathan remembered before vanishing was pulling over on a deserted stretch of road, writing in his journal that he was just going to rest his eyes for a moment. When they found his car days later, it was parked at mile 187, the keys still in the ignition, the driver's seat empty. In the back on the floor lay a crumpled snack wrapper soaked in something black and sticky, and in the rest stop lot, the vending machine still hummed, louder than ever, waiting for the next traveler to pull in. On nights when the Texas sky turns ink black and the horizon feels like a wall pressing in on itself, Route 66 outside Amarillo becomes a ribbon of silence broken only by the groan of tires over asphalt. Long-haul truckers know it, locals avoid it, and the occasional traveler, drawn by the romance of the open road, finds themselves out there where the prairie swallows sound and the stars hang heavy and sharp above. That stretch of road has its own stories, whispered in diners and gas stations, but the one that never fades is of the woman in white, the one who waits just beyond the edge of headlights, hand raised, eyes downcast, the perfect image of someone desperate to get home. Earl Simmons was the kind of man who thought himself immune to ghost stories. He'd driven his rig across the country for 20 years, knew every highway diner between Phoenix and St. Louis, and claimed more than once that he feared nothing short of his ex-wife's lawyer. But one night in late August, with the air hot enough that the road shimmered even after sunset, Earl's bravado thinned. His CB radio had been silent for an hour, no other rigs in sight, just the endless sway of weeds along the ditch and the quiet hiss of cicadas. Then he saw her, pale and slender, dressed in a loose white dress that caught no breeze, standing near a rusted mile marker just outside Amarillo. She lifted her hand almost shyly, and Earl braked without thinking. She slid into the passenger seat without a word. Her skin looked moonlit even in the glow of the dashboard, and her eyes were unfocused, like she was staring through him and out to somewhere only she could see. Earl cleared his throat, asked where she was headed. She whispered, "Just a little ways down, past the first mile marker." Her voice was low, cracked at the edges like she hadn't spoken in years. He nodded, trying to shake off the chill that crept into his bones despite the fact his air conditioning had been dead since Oklahoma City. The truck rumbled forward and Earl tried to distract himself by fiddling with the radio, but the dial only spat static. At the mile marker, he glanced to the right to point it out, maybe make small talk, and when he looked back, she was gone. The door was shut, the seat empty, no sound but the hum of his engine. He pulled over, heart hammering, searched the road and the ditch with his flashlight, but there was nothing. No prints in the dust, no sound of retreating footsteps, just the same chorus of cicadas and the faint smell of dry grass baking under heat. Earl didn't speak of it until weeks later, and when he did, his hands shook so badly his coffee sloshed out of the mug. Locals said she'd been walking that stretch of Route 66 since the 50s. The story changed depending on who told it. Some said she was a young bride killed in a car crash on her wedding night, veil tangled in the wreckage of a Buick that burned just past the city limits. Others swore she was a girl who'd run away from home, picked up by a stranger who left her body in the weeds after doing worse. A few even whispered that she wasn't human at all, that she was something older, tied to the land long before the road was laid down, borrowing the shape of a woman to lure in the lonely. Whatever the truth, everyone agreed, she never made it past the first mile marker. That was where she vanished, like the ground itself swallowed her whole. But not everyone got off as easy as Earl. There was a boy named Caleb who worked at the truck stop just outside town. He was 19, restless, and too curious for his own good. He'd heard the stories since childhood, but unlike the others who treated them with wary respect, Caleb wanted proof. One humid night, he borrowed his uncle's Chevy, drove out with a camera and a six-pack. He parked just past the city limits and waited, the headlights trained on the dark curve of the road. An hour passed, then two, and just when he was ready to give up, she appeared, exactly as the stories described. He shouted with excitement, snapped photo after photo as she drew closer until she stopped by his window. The air grew heavy, his breath turned shallow, and the sound on the road died into silence. No crickets, no cicadas, just the sound of his own blood rushing in his ears. She leaned in, eyes dull and wet like river stones, and whispered, "Take me home." His camera clattered to the floorboard, and by the time he reached for the door handle, she was gone. Caleb never showed those photos to anyone. He claimed the film was blank, ruined somehow, but his friends noticed he never drove at night again. Not on Route 66, not anywhere. He left Amarillo within a year, and those who saw him later swore he looked 10 years older, like something had drained the youth right out of him. Then there were the disappearances. Tourists mostly, passing through, chasing the Route 66 nostalgia. A young couple from Missouri, a retiree from New Mexico, a college kid hitchhiking home for the summer. They were seen leaving Amarillo but never arrived at their destinations. Their cars turned up abandoned at gas stations or rest stops, engines still warm, doors unlocked, keys in the ignition. Sometimes their luggage was neatly stacked in the trunk, untouched. Sometimes the trunk was empty, as though they'd never packed at all. Police chalked it up to crime, drifters, bad luck. But locals whispered about the woman in white. They said maybe she'd grown tired of vanishing. Maybe now she took her passengers with her. One stormy night, a farmer named Harold was driving his old pickup along that stretch when he saw her, standing barefoot in the rain, soaked but still pale, her dress clinging to her thin frame. Against every instinct, Harold stopped. She climbed in, dripping water onto his cracked leather seat. She didn't speak, just stared straight ahead, her lips moving silently like she was mouthing a prayer or a curse. When they reached the first mile marker, Harold braced himself for her to vanish. But she didn't. Instead, she turned her head slowly, met his eyes, and smiled. He described it later as the kind of smile you'd see on someone watching a house burn. Then she leaned close, and though the rain hammered the roof of the truck, he swore he heard her whisper clear as day, "You're not ready yet." And then, like smoke in the wind, she was gone, leaving only the faint impression of wet fabric on his seat. Harold never drove that road again. He made the detour every time, no matter the extra miles. And when people asked, he'd just shake his head and say some roads weren't meant to be traveled twice. The phantom hitchhiker of Route 66 still waits near Amarillo. Drivers swear they've seen her by the mile marker, arm outstretched, dress glowing under high beams, always alone, always silent. Some give her a ride, and she vanishes, as the legend says. Some never speak of what they saw. And some, the unlucky few, never make it past that first mile marker at all. Because out there, where the prairie swallows sound and the road winds on like a scar across the earth, something waits that isn't human, something that wears the shape of a pale woman in white, and once you stop for her, you carry her with you forever, whether you know it or not. The Screaming Bridge sits at the ragged edge of Arlington, halfway between Fort Worth's sprawl and the quieter reaches of Lake Arlington. It is a squat concrete overpass, nothing grand, spanning a dried creek bed where the trees hang heavy with Spanish moss and the ground glitters with broken bottles from decades of teenage gatherings. By day it looks almost harmless, a relic of an older road system that got bypassed when the highway went in. But at night, especially near midnight, the air feels charged there. The locals whisper about it the way folks in small towns always do, trading the story like a curse. They say if you park your car at the center of the bridge, kill the engine, and wait for the clock to strike 12, you'll hear the squeal of unseen tires, the tearing twist of metal, and a scream that rips right through you. And if you're unlucky, the scream carries your name spoken in a voice that doesn't belong to you. The story goes back to the 70s when a carload of cheerleaders drove too fast on a rainy night, skidded, and plummeted over the railing into the blackness below. All 5 died. Some say you can still see the rust stains from the wreck if you shine your flashlight just right on the concrete supports. Others swear the stains move, darkening and dripping like fresh blood when you linger too long. It's the kind of tale that keeps kids awake at slumber parties, but the real truth is this: the bridge has a pull, an invitation that dares the living to press closer. I felt it myself, though I wish I hadn't. It was a humid summer in 2004, long after midnight when I first went. I was 17, stuffed in the back of my friend Ethan's Camaro with 3 others. We had a 6-pack, a joint someone's brother scored, and just enough boredom to tempt us toward the bridge. Ethan's girlfriend, Jessica, was egging him on, saying she wanted to hear the famous screams. The rest of us laughed nervously, trying to mask the way the night seemed heavier the closer we got. The crickets had gone silent on the drive out, the roadside crosses marking past wrecks flashing in the headlights like accusations. When we pulled up, the bridge loomed ahead, its guardrails dented, its asphalt patched and repatched, the kind of place the city forgets until someone complains. Ethan cut the engine right in the middle. The cicadas hummed for a moment and then stilled, as if the whole world was holding its breath. The first few minutes were just silence and nervous laughter. We passed the joint around, pretending not to check our watches. Jessica leaned out the window, hair spilling over, calling into the dark, "Hey girls, you out there? Sing us a song." Nothing came back but the faint splash of water somewhere below. Then at exactly midnight, a sound split the air. Tires screeching, rubber ripping across pavement. We all froze. There was no car, no headlights, no dust kicked up on the road. Yet the noise circled us, loud and violent, like a wreck happening over and over. Metal crunched, glass shattered, the awful twisting shriek of steel folding in on itself. Ethan turned the key, but the engine just whined uselessly. I remember my heart slamming against my ribs, every instinct begging me to run, but I couldn't move. That's when the voices started. At first it was a single wail, high-pitched, unmistakably human. Then it multiplied, layered on itself until it was a chorus of screaming girls. The sound pressed in from every direction, shaking the windows, vibrating the frame of the car. Jessica covered her ears, tears spilling down her cheeks. Ethan cursed and slammed the steering wheel. And then, beneath the screaming, a new sound rose. Clear as if someone was sitting in the back seat with us, a voice that said my name, not in my mother's tone. Not in any tone I recognized, but in a warped, guttural imitation, dragging each syllable as if it hated the shape of the word. The others didn't hear it at first. Then the voice spoke Ethan's name, then Jessica's, each one in that same broken parody. By the time it said the last of us, we were clawing at the doors, stumbling into the humid dark. The bridge shook beneath us, though no car had passed. I swear the guardrails rattled as if struck by invisible metal. Down below, the dry creek bed shimmered like water, but the glint wasn't moonlight. It was headlights, dozens of them, flickering and vanishing like phantoms. Ethan finally got the engine to turn over, the roar of it drowning out the voices, but as we peeled away, I glanced in the mirror. For a split second, I saw figures standing in the road. 5 girls, their hair dripping wet though there hadn't been rain in weeks. Faces twisted, mouths open wide in that endless scream. One of them raised her arm, pointing straight at me, and though the sound was muffled by distance, I could still hear my name in the air, drawn out, jagged, like glass dragged across concrete. We never talked about it afterward, not really. Jessica broke up with Ethan 2 weeks later, saying she couldn't look at him without remembering that night. One of the other guys, Ben, moved to Houston and never came back. Ethan got in a bad wreck 3 years later on a frontage road outside Fort Worth. Witnesses said they heard tires squeal before his truck veered off, though there were no skid marks, no other car. I was the one who identified his body. His face was locked in a silent scream. I tried to tell myself it was coincidence, just the brain's way of explaining what it can't make sense of. But I can still hear it on quiet nights when the wind shifts, the squeal of phantom tires and the grinding tear of metal. And always my name. The screaming bridge is still there, though the city tried to close it off with barricades a few years back. People move them, teenagers most of all, drawn the same way we were, hungry for a thrill they don't understand. They say the stains have spread, long black streaks down the supports that no power washer can scrub away. Folks who live nearby complain about hearing cries at night, even when the bridge is empty. And sometimes if you dare to stand on it after midnight, you'll hear more than just the wreck. You'll hear the bridge calling you, each syllable stretched and broken, a voice that doesn't belong to this world, waiting to drag you over the edge and add your scream to the chorus forever. Highway 281 runs like a vein through the heart of Texas, stretching from the Mexican border all the way north, a black ribbon of asphalt flanked by wide plains, cedar breaks, and scrubby pasture land. Somewhere between Johnson City and Marble Falls, the road twists in a way that doesn't quite belong, a mean-spirited bend that locals have whispered about for decades. They call it Dead Man's Curve, a stretch where more wrecks have happened than anyone can count, where roadside crosses with faded plastic flowers bloom like weeds in the gravel. The stories vary depending on who tells them, but the one that always returns like a snake circling back on itself is about the black pickup. They say it doesn't matter what time of night you drive through. If you're unlucky, headlights will flare up in your rearview mirror. Too bright, too close. A black truck, old Ford by some accounts, newer Chevy by others, will climb onto your bumper so close you can't see the grill, just white-hot glare flooding your cab. If you speed up, it keeps pace. If you slow down, it noses closer, shoving air against your tailgate like a shove from an unseen hand. Most folks say it tries to run you off into the bar ditch until panic makes you wrench the wheel or slam the brakes. But the cruelest part is this. When you finally stop and turn your head to curse the driver, no one is there. Just dark, empty highway behind you. No taillights, no engine, no sound but your own ragged breathing and the cicadas buzzing in the fence lines. That was the story my cousin Clay told me one summer, sitting on the tailgate of his rusted Silverado outside a gas station in Burnett. He grinned wide, cigarette dangling from his lip, but there was something in his eyes that didn't match the grin. A tightness, like maybe he'd seen something and didn't much like remembering it. He told me he'd been chased once, back when he was 19, hauling hay bales home after midnight. He swore the truck behind him was so close he could hear the engine growling, but when he jerked the wheel and skidded into the gravel shoulder, the night behind him was clean. He'd laughed then too, but it was hollow, and when I pressed him, he just shook his head and said some things you leave alone. Of course I didn't. I was younger, cocky, and I had a taste for getting into places I shouldn't. I kept thinking about those crosses nailed into fence posts, the candles melted down to puddles of wax under mesquite trees. I thought about that curve, the way folks whispered about it like a curse. It was late August when I decided to test it for myself. Heat still rising off the road at midnight, the air thick with the smell of dust and cedar. I borrowed my father's old Dodge, a rattling beast that smelled of oil and leather, and pointed it south on 281 with nothing but my nerves and a cassette of old country songs rattling in the deck. The highway at night has a personality you don't notice in daylight. The towns slip away faster. Gas stations shuttered, neon signs dead and flickering. Even the ranch houses with their porch lights glowing feel like lonely sentinels against the vast dark. The road narrows in your mind until it feels like you're floating on nothing. A strip of paint and tar suspended in black air. I passed Marble Falls and the lake glittered faintly on my right, moonlight cutting silver across the water. I remember thinking about how many drunks must have gone off that road into the lake, how many never came back up. By the time I neared the curve, my hands were slick on the wheel. The road bent like an elbow, guardrails dented and scarred where other drivers had lost their battles. My headlights picked out a scattering of white crosses, plastic roses tipped over in the breeze. I eased down to 50, then 40, my eyes darting to the mirror again and again, seeing nothing but the trembling glow of my taillights. The radio hissed as the tape wound out, leaving me alone with the hum of tires, For a long mile, nothing happened. I felt stupid, sitting there waiting for ghosts. Then, just when I'd let my shoulders sag a little, headlights bloomed behind me. At first I thought it was another late-night traveler. Someone headed home to San Antonio, but the lights were wrong. They were too bright, too sharp, like they'd risen up out of the pavement itself. In seconds they filled the glass, white glare burning into my skull. I couldn't see the hood of the truck, couldn't make out the grill, but I knew it was there. I pressed the gas, the Dodge shuddering as the speedometer ticked past 60. The light surged with me, hugging my bumper so tight I swore I could feel heat searing through the metal. My chest locked up. My fingers dug into the wheel and the curve loomed ahead. The road tilted, the guardrail flashed silver in the beams, and I heard a low growl behind me. Not quite an engine, but something deeper, hungrier. I jerked the wheel, nearly fishtailing into the ditch, and then slammed on the brakes, the tires screaming. Dust rose, rocks pinged against the undercarriage, and the Dodge skidded to a crooked stop in the gravel shoulder. I snapped my head back, heart pounding so loud it filled the cab. There was nothing. No truck, no lights. Just the long black ribbon stretching behind me, empty as a grave. I sat there shaking, trying to breathe, every hair on my arm standing straight. The night pressed against the windows, thick and watchful. I thought about Clay and his tight grin, about the way he wouldn't look me in the eye when he said some things you leave alone. I wanted to turn the key and peel out of there, but something in me made me step out instead. The gravel crunched under my boots, the cicadas screamed from the fence lines, and the heat of the day still clung to the air. I walked to the back of the truck, expecting to see gouges in the tailgate. Maybe the shadow of headlights burned into the metal. There was nothing but dust and rust. Then I noticed the crosses. I'd stopped right beside a cluster of them, 6 or 7 hammered into the earth, names painted in fading letters. And behind them, in the weeds at the edge of the fence, I saw something else. A strip of rubber shredded like from a blown tire. Next to it lay a piece of bent chrome, and for a second I thought it was junk tossed from the road. But when I leaned closer, I saw it was a fragment of a grill. Black paint peeling, teeth of metal curled inward like a sneer. I touched it and it was cold. Colder than the air should have been. My fingers came away greasy, smelling of burnt oil. That was when I heard the engine. Not behind me. Not anywhere on the road, but low and steady in the air around me, like the earth itself was idling. I froze, heart slamming against my ribs, and the crosses rattled in the breeze as if something had brushed past them. I backed up to the Dodge, slid into the seat, and turned the key with shaking hands. The motor caught loud and alive, and I roared off that shoulder like hell itself was nipping at my heels. In the mirror, for a fraction of a second, I thought I saw headlights flare again. But when I blinked, the road was empty. I never drove 281 at night again. Clay and I don't talk about it, not because we don't believe, but because we do. The road keeps its own secrets, and that curve takes more than its share. Sometimes when I pass it in daylight, I swear I see fresh skid marks arcing into the gravel, marks that weren't there the week before. And sometimes at night, when I'm lying awake listening to the wind, I hear the low growl of an engine that doesn't belong to anything living, and I know that truck is still out there, hunting the next fool who thinks they're brave enough to ride Dead Man's Curve. The highway had been a ribbon of darkness for miles, broken only by the occasional reflective sign warning of deer crossings or low bridges, but I hadn't seen another car in nearly an hour. The fuel gauge had been resting on empty long enough that the warning chime no longer sounded, as if the car had given up reminding me. I was running on fumes, heart racing every time the engine gave the faintest hiccup. When I finally saw a glow up ahead, I thought maybe I was hallucinating. A gas station, or the suggestion of one, sat in the hollow of the road's curve, its canopy a looming silhouette against the sky. Relief washed through me as I slowed down, steering toward salvation. The pumps stood there in a neat row, their paint chipped, their displays dark. Yet when I slid the nozzle into my tank and squeezed the handle, the pump hummed alive. Numbers clicked upward on the old-fashioned rolling meter. Gas flowed freely, and I breathed out for the first time in half an hour. But there was something wrong. The station itself had no lights. The windows were black. The flicker I had mistaken for a neon glow turned out to be nothing more than the moonlight reflecting off cracked glass. The canopy above me groaned in the breeze, its panels rattling. It felt like filling up inside the skeleton of a place that had been dead for decades. I was almost done when I noticed the attendant. He stood just beyond the glass door of the convenience store, motionless. I hadn't seen him approach. I hadn't seen him move at all. He was simply there, pressed against the inside of the glass, his head tilted slightly as if he were curious about me. His uniform was an oil-stained shirt with a name tag too worn to read. But it was his face that locked me in place. He had no eyes. The sockets were smooth, pale skin stretched taut where hollows should have been. I dropped the nozzle, gasoline spilling onto the pavement, and took a step back. The man pushed the door open, the hinges shrieking in protest, and stepped into the night. His voice was flat, as though forced out of a throat that rarely spoke. He told me not to linger. The words were simple, but they landed like a command, thick and suffocating. His head twitched slightly, like he was listening to something I couldn't hear. I stammered a question. What was this place? Why no lights? But he only repeated himself, slower, sharper. Do not linger. I didn't want to. My hands shook as I fumbled to put the nozzle back into its cradle. But the pump clung to me, the handle refusing to let go until the man tilted his head again, as if granting permission. Only then did it release, snapping free from my grip. I thought about leaving, just climbing into the car and driving until the tank ran dry again, but I couldn't shake the sensation that something was watching us both. The night was too still, the air too heavy. Beyond the circle of cracked asphalt where the station sat, the Texas brush swayed without wind. The dark stretched out in every direction, but it wasn't empty. I could feel it pressing against me, like the land itself was waiting. The man without eyes stepped closer, and though I wanted to recoil, I didn't move. His face was inches from mine. Those smooth sockets angled toward me with an intensity that churned my stomach. He whispered now, his voice a rasp that cracked on every syllable. They come when the lights go out. Don't linger. His hand, grease-stained and cold, gripped my wrist. I felt the unnatural strength in it, and my breath caught. He tilted his head again, listening, and I realized with horror that I could hear it too now. Something moving in the brush, dragging, scraping, circling the station. More than one thing. Heavy bodies shifting in the dark, waiting for me to stay just a little too long. I yanked free and stumbled back toward my car. He didn't follow. He only stood there, rigid, his empty gaze fixed on me. I slid into the driver's seat, jammed the key into the ignition, and prayed. The engine coughed, stuttered, then roared to life. My headlights spilled across the pumps, the cracked pavement, and for a split second I saw shapes at the tree line, tall, bent things that didn't move like people, with arms too long and heads cocked at unnatural angles. Their bodies seemed to shiver against the dark like heat rising from asphalt, but their attention was unmistakable. They were waiting for me to falter. The attendant raised one finger to his lips, a gesture of silence, though no mouth smiled, no eyes blinked. I floored the accelerator, tires screeching as I tore out of the lot, gravel spitting against my undercarriage. I didn't look back, though I could feel the road behind me bending under pursuit. For miles I drove without breathing, without blinking, until the dim glow of another town appeared ahead and I dared to ease off the gas. At the diner where I stopped, fluorescent lights hummed overhead, bright and clean. The waitress poured me coffee without asking, her kindness so normal it felt like a hallucination. But when I glanced out the window toward the highway, I swore I saw the shadow of a canopy in the distance, broken and waiting, and in the reflection of the glass behind my shoulder, I saw the faint outline of a man in an oil-stained shirt, his head tilted, listening, waiting to remind me again not to linger. The CB was supposed to be company, not curse. That's what they told me when I first started driving rigs out of Lubbock in the mid-90s. Long hauls, nothing but blacktop stretching ahead and the hiss of tires on warm pavement. And that little box with the mic dangling from its coiled cord was a lifeline. You'd talk about traffic, joke about lot lizards, swap stories to keep each other awake. A voice on Channel 19 was supposed to mean you weren't alone. But sometimes, when the night stretched too thin and the highway narrowed down to a strip of pale gray under the moon, you heard voices that weren't part of any convoy. It started small for me. Headed east on I-20 near Sweetwater, I had the CB tuned low, mostly static, and the occasional trucker out of Odessa grumbling about a state trooper running radar. Then between the crackles I heard laughter. High, sharp, unmistakably children. Kids don't belong on a trucker's band. And they sure as hell don't belong out there at 1 a.m. The sound came sudden, like it had been waiting under the static all along, and it ran cold down my spine. I reached for the mic, asked who was fooling around. Nothing back, just the hiss. Then more laughter, doubled. like two kids chasing each other around a playground that didn't exist. After a mile or two, it was gone, like it had been pulled out of the air. You shrug that kind of thing off. Highway plays tricks on your brain, fatigue and caffeine, shadows stretching across billboards, eyes catching movement where there isn't any. But then I started hearing the praying. A woman's voice, soft at first, words swallowed by static, then clearer as if she was sitting right there in the cab with me. "Deliver us from evil," she kept saying. That phrase over and over like she was stuck. I thought maybe it was some driver's wife back home, bored and lonely, messing around on a mic, but there was no call sign, no chatter, just that same broken rhythm. And every time it bled into the brakes. That's what really did it. The screech. High-pitched, metal on metal, endless. Not a squeal that fades. Endless. You'd turn the volume down, but it still leaked out like it wasn't coming from the radio at all, but from the bones of the truck. Other drivers knew. You'd stop at a Flying J around Abilene, lean against your cab with a cigarette, and some old boy with a face lined like weathered leather would ask if you'd heard the kids yet, or the prayer, or that damned sound of brakes that never end. Nobody smiled when they asked. Nobody said it was a joke. A few said they'd seen things too. Headlights in the mirrors that never passed. A shape standing on the shoulder near Cisco, waving one arm, but when you pulled even with it, there was nothing but mesquite and dark grass. A driver out of Amarillo swore he'd passed a wreck that wasn't there. A jackknifed rig with its cab caved in, lights flashing, only to circle back with another driver later and find bare pavement. The worst was near Lake Leon. I was hauling late, no other rigs in sight, CB chatter dead quiet. The kids came first, laughing so loud it hurt my ears, bouncing from speaker to speaker like they were running circles around my cab. I grabbed the mic, demanded they cut it out, but the only answer was that woman's voice whispering faster now, her prayer rattling out like a scratched record. Then the brakes hit shrill and endless, and I felt the wheel jerk in my hands. The whole truck shuddered, pulled to the right like something massive had clipped me. Out of the corner of my eye I saw lights, headlamps burning bright, a rig screaming past in the lane beside me. Too close, too fast. Except when I turned my head, there was nothing but open highway. My heart hammered so hard I thought I'd black out. I yanked the rig to the shoulder and sat there, hands shaking, while the CB kept hissing with that sound, that scream of steel, until finally it guttered out like a candle. You want to know the part that makes me keep the damn radio turned off now? It isn't the voices or the phantom brakes. It's what happened after. Sitting there in the dark, hazards flashing, I heard a knock on my passenger door. Not the wind, not some creak of metal. A knock, 3 times soft like someone small was asking to be let in. I didn't look. I couldn't. I just put the truck back in gear and drove with the door locked and the CB dead silent. But even then, faint through the roar of the engine, I swear I heard a child's voice right behind my seat, whispering my name. And the only thing louder was the scream of brakes carrying on, never ending, somewhere out there on the Texas night roads. The motel sat alone on the shoulder of Highway 87, its cracked neon sign flickering red against the black Texas night. The place had no name anymore. Years ago, the plastic face of the sign had blown away in a storm, leaving only a buzzing frame and a single red letter that might once have been part of the word sunset. Travelers didn't come here looking for it. They came because they were too tired to keep driving, because the next town was 30 miles out, because their headlights cut only so far into the dark expanse of scrub and barbed wire. The building itself was L-shaped, a sagging row of doors facing the road, a single office at the corner where a faint lamp glowed behind smudged glass. The air always smelled of dust and something sharp and metallic, like rusted pipes or dried blood. The first time I stopped, I was halfway to San Angelo, running low on gas and patience. The office was unlocked, though no clerk was inside. On the counter sat a wooden tray, the kind you'd see in churches for collection plates, and scattered across it were brass keys, all on the same tarnished keychains. Each tag bore the same number, engraved so deeply it looked carved with a knife. 6, there must have been 20 of them, and every last one said the same thing. 6. I stood there a long minute, waiting for someone to come out from the back. No one did. Finally, I picked one at random and slipped it into my pocket. The key felt colder than it should have, and heavier, like it belonged to something older than a motel door. The room I unlocked was number 6, the brass number screwed crookedly into the wood, Inside, the air was stale and yellow with the scent of cigarettes. The bedspread was a faded green, patterned with vines and stains that refused to wash out. A Bible sat on the nightstand, its leather cover bloated with water damage. The television was the old box kind, the kind that hummed even when turned off. The bathroom light buzzed overhead, threatening to go dark with every flicker. It was ugly, it was depressing, but it was a place to sleep, so I dropped my bag and shut the door. I slept, but not well. The highway noises came thin through the walls, but that wasn't what woke me. Sometime past 2, I heard something scrape across the floor outside my room. Slow, dragging steps like someone moving their feet through gravel. The sound moved past my window and stopped near the door. I held still, my ears straining. Then softly, the doorknob rattled. Just once, as if someone were testing it. My heart froze, and I looked across the room where I'd set the key on the dresser. It wasn't there anymore. The brass tag, the cold weight, it was gone. The knob rattled again, firmer this time. I wanted to call out, to tell whoever it was to get lost, but I couldn't make my throat work. I waited, sweat soaking the sheets, until finally the sound drifted away back down the row of rooms. I didn't sleep again that night. When morning came, I sat up bleary-eyed and looked to the door. It stood open, swung wide onto the parking lot. I know I'd locked it. I know because I checked it 3 times before lying down, but now it yawned onto the daylight, and the key was back lying neatly in the center of the dresser. I checked out without bothering to find anyone in the office. The tray of keys was full again, everyone gleaming with the number 6. I told myself it was exhaustion. I told myself it was one of those tricks your mind plays when the night is long and your nerves are thin. But that wasn't the last time I ended up there. The second visit was months later, though I hadn't planned on it. My map app glitched, my gas ran low again, and suddenly the motel was there, rising out of the flat Texas brush like it had been waiting. The office looked the same. The tray of keys was there, the same brass tags, the same number. This time I hesitated before taking one. I thought about leaving, pushing on to the next town. But it was late, and the gas needle hovered on empty, and I couldn't see another choice. So I picked up another key. Room 6 again. The room looked identical to before, right down to the stain on the bedspread. For a moment I thought it was the exact same room, as if I had never left. I tried the next door over just to see. It too was numbered 6, and the key in my hand slid into its lock like it belonged. I didn't open it, though. Something about the thought of 2 identical rooms, both marked 6, both welcoming me, turned my stomach. I went back to the first door and closed it behind me. The night passed worse this time. The dragging steps returned, but they came sooner, before midnight. They moved slower too, and when they stopped at my door, the knob turned, not rattled. It turned with force, grinding against the lock, and I saw the doorframe shudder. I sat upright, clutching the sheets, and when I looked again to the dresser, the key was gone. My stomach twisted. I stared at the door, waiting for it to burst open. It never did. Eventually, the steps shuffled away, fading down the corridor, though I never heard them stop. At dawn, the door was wide open again. The key rested on the dresser like nothing had happened. I left without looking back, but not before glancing into the other rooms. Every door bore the number 6, and every lock turned for me. Inside each was the same bed, the same Bible, the same buzzing light. The rooms were copies stretched along the row like a reflection in cracked glass. I swore I'd never return. I swore I'd take the long way, keep my tank full, anything to avoid passing that stretch of highway. But last week I saw it again. The neon frame glowed red against the dusk, waiting. This time I didn't stop. I pressed the gas and stared hard at the road ahead. But in the corner of my eye I saw the doors. Every one stood open, gaping into the dark, and inside each I saw a figure standing just past the threshold. Dozens of them, pale and still, their faces too far to make out. And in my passenger seat, though I hadn't touched it, lay a motel key, brass and heavy, stamped with the number 6. I threw it out the window. Or at least I thought I did. But when I got home, when I laid my bag on the table and unzipped it, the key was inside, gleaming up at me. And last night at 2 in the morning, I heard footsteps in the hall outside my apartment. Slow, dragging steps, stopping just outside my door. When I checked this morning, the key was gone again, and the lock felt cold under my hand. Would you like me to continue this into a full-length series of connected stories around the motel, so each tale builds the legend deeper? Or should I keep it a standalone horror novella style every time? The gas station at exit 42 sits on the edge of nothing, Out where the land flattens into a sheet of asphalt and heat, where Texas stretches wide enough to make a man feel like an insect crawling across a skillet. Drivers know the place, but not for its service or its cheap coffee. It's the mirror in the men's restroom. The mirror that doesn't quite reflect you. It's a convenience store with a rattling ice machine outside, 2 cracked pumps, and a buzzing fluorescent sign that hasn't been replaced in 20 years. The clerk is usually some half-asleep kid in his 20s, or sometimes a pale, heavy-eyed woman who never bothers to look up from her crossword. People only stop there because their tanks are empty and the next town is 30 miles further down I-20. Most don't go inside if they can help it. But for the ones who do, there's the mirror. Truckers whisper about it at diners, always after midnight, always with a low voice. The way men whisper about a hitchhiker that isn't supposed to be real. They say you wash your hands in that bathroom. Glance up and the glass doesn't show you at all. Instead, it shows someone else. And if you wait long enough, if you let the air conditioner hum and the light above flicker just a little, that someone shifts into focus. Clear as day. A farmer's wife, a sheriff, a kid on a bike. Whoever it is, they're the one who'll find you dead when your time comes. Most people laugh it off. You'd have to be crazy to believe a thing like that. But some don't laugh. Some leave in silence, pale as chalk, their cars tearing gravel as they race back to the highway. I didn't laugh when I heard about it. I should have. But I didn't. It was early June when I stopped there on my way to Abilene. The sun was dropping, the road stretched long and red behind me, and I needed gas bad enough to roll the dice on exit 42. The place looked abandoned from a distance, but the pumps worked, sputtering and coughing like something waking from a bad dream. Inside, the air reeked of old grease and pine sol. Shelves of dusty jerky, stale chips, and candy bars that looked like they'd melted and hardened 100 times filled the aisles. The clerk was a teenage boy, pale and skinny, his earbuds dangling loose. He didn't look up when I pushed open the door. I bought a Coke and asked for the restroom. He just pointed down a short hall. His eyes stayed on the floor like he was afraid if he looked at me too long, I'd ask him something he couldn't answer. The restroom door creaked when I opened it. A sour smell of mildew hit first. The tiles were cracked, the grout black with mold, the sink stained brown from years of hard water. Above it hung the mirror, wider than it needed to be, framed in cheap metal. The light above flickered, buzzing loud enough to set my teeth on edge. I washed my hands, felt the cold water sputter and spit, and then I looked up. At first it seemed normal. There I was, tired, needing a shave, my shirt sticking to my back from the heat. But the longer I looked, the more I felt it. Something off. Something sliding sideways in the glass. My reflection seemed softer, like the edges were fading. My chest felt tight. I blinked. When I opened my eyes again, I wasn't there. The mirror showed a man I'd never seen. He was older, heavyset, his hair thinning. He wore a deputy's uniform, one of those tan West Texas outfits with a badge that caught the light. He was standing by a dirt road, one hand shading his eyes. His lips moved, and though no sound came through the glass, I knew what he was saying found another one. The glass rippled, like heat on pavement, and then my own reflection slid back into place. My throat was dry. I shoved the door open and stumbled back down the hall. The kid at the counter didn't even blink when I dropped my Coke and walked out without a word. I should have kept driving. Should have told myself it was just the heat, or bad lights, or maybe the Coke had been spiked with something. But I couldn't stop thinking about the look in that deputy's eyes. Not anger, not pity, just resignation. Like finding me was something he'd been doing his whole life. That night I checked into a motel outside Sweetwater. The air conditioner rattled, the sheets smelled of bleach, and I didn't sleep a damn minute. I kept seeing that man's face every time I closed my eyes. By dawn, I convinced myself I was imagining things, until the news came on. A story about a drifter found outside Abilene, his car run off a dirt road. Body discovered by a local deputy. The photo flashed across the screen. Same man, same uniform, same heavy-set face. It wasn't me they found. Not that time. But it was enough. Enough to make me wonder how many others had seen him in that glass before their turn came. Enough to make me know that mirror wasn't broken or cracked. It was worse. It was a window. I never went back to exit 42, but sometimes when I'm driving late at night, the exit sign comes into view, glowing pale green in my headlights. And I swear every time I pass it, I feel the pull, like the mirror is waiting, whispering that it isn't done yet. And I know sooner or later, I'll have to stop again because we all do, and when I do, The glass won't show me anymore, it'll show you, the one who finds me. Highway 59 runs long and flat across East Texas, a ribbon of faded asphalt that slices through pine woods and lonely stretches of farmland. On summer nights, the cicadas scream from the trees and the heat lingers on the road like a second skin. Truckers take it to avoid the cluster of Houston, and locals know it as the fastest way to vanish between towns. There's a legend about that stretch of road, one that every bartender, gas station clerk, and old-timer will tell you if you linger too long. They say a dog waits there, just past mile marker 72, where the blacktop curves around a drainage ditch. A big shaggy thing, matted fur the color of rust, one paw dragging as it limps into the headlights. If you stop, it will look at you, and your engine will die as if the battery has been ripped out. If you don't stop, your brakes will fail later that night, and whatever happens next will be worse than if you had just faced the stare. That story sounded like drunken nonsense to Mason Reddick the first time he heard it. He was 34, divorced, and trying to rebuild his life in Lufkin after a failed marriage and a layoff from the oil fields. He worked nights driving a delivery van up and down Highway 59, carrying mechanical parts to warehouses and body shops. It was steady money, lonely work, and he liked it that way. But on one thick August night, with the air smelling like wet pine needles and exhaust, Mason learned the story wasn't just a story. He spotted the dog around 11, a little south of Nacogdoches. At first it was just a shadow slinking along the shoulder. Then it limped straight into his lane. Mason slammed the brakes and cursed, tires squealing on the hot pavement. The van rocked, the seatbelt cutting into his chest. The dog stood in the beams of his headlights, mangy and shuddering, one back leg bent wrong. Its eyes weren't glowing yellow like an animal's should in the lights. They were dark, too dark, as if they swallowed the glow instead of reflecting it. The engine coughed and died. Mason sat gripping the wheel. The silence so sudden it felt like the world had been unplugged. The dog just looked at him, not wagging, not growling, just staring. Mason's breath caught in his throat, his hands slick on the wheel. He didn't move, didn't dare. Then the dog turned, limped back into the ditch and vanished into the reeds. A second later, the van coughed back to life on its own. Mason slammed it into gear and tore down the road, heart hammering so hard it blurred his vision. He didn't sleep that night. He sat in his apartment staring at the ceiling, replaying the eyes over and over. By morning, he told himself it had been heat stroke or a trick of the lights. He even laughed about it to one of the guys at the shop. But when he mentioned the engine dying, the man stopped laughing and asked where it happened. Mason said mile 72. The man's face went pale. He didn't say a word, just turned and walked off. For the next week, Mason drove his route with the windows down, smoking nervously, jumping at shadows. He didn't see the dog again, but he felt it. In his mirrors, in the corner of his eye, in the brush that rustled when no wind blew. On the 8th night, he decided to take the long way around through Henderson just to avoid that stretch. But the van had other plans. Halfway there, the brakes gave out without warning. The pedal sank to the floor, useless. Mason swerved, tires screaming, narrowly missing a pickup before plowing into a ditch. He crawled out unhurt, trembling, staring at the road. In the distance, a shaggy shape stood in the grass, watching. He reported the accident, got the van towed, and took the week off. He thought maybe it was just coincidence. Brakes failed sometimes. Roads had stray dogs. But the unease wouldn't leave him. He started hearing claws on his apartment floor at night, though he didn't own a pet. He woke to the stink of wet fur and the sound of panting in the dark. Once, fumbling for the light switch, he caught a glimpse of something by the closet door. A hunched shadow with two glistening eyes, gone when the bulb flickered on. He slept with the lights on after that. By September, Mason wasn't himself anymore. His co-workers whispered about the weight he was losing, how he jumped at loud noises. One night, drunk and desperate, he went back to the curve at mile 72. He parked on the shoulder and waited. The air was still, the trees black against the stars. At midnight, he heard the limp, step drag, step drag. The dog came out of the ditch exactly as before. Mason stepped out of the van this time, fists clenched, sweat rolling down his spine. The dog stopped and stared. Its eyes were bottomless. Mason whispered, "What do you want?" His voice cracked. The dog opened its mouth. Not a growl, not a bark. A sound like metal twisting, like brakes screaming as a car plummets downhill. Mason fell to his knees, ears ringing, blood warm against his lip where his nose burst. When he looked up, the dog was gone. He doesn't remember getting back into the van. only that he woke the next morning in his bed, clothes filthy, shoes wet with ditch water. From then on, he never took Highway 59. He moved out of Lufkin altogether, taking work in Dallas. But some nights, when he's driving home late on the interstate, he sees a shape on the shoulder limping into his headlights. The engine coughs. The wheel locks. And Mason knows no matter how far he runs, Highway 59 is still under his tires. Because the dog isn't waiting at mile 72 anymore. It's waiting for him, always. The stretch of I-35 that cuts through Waco has its share of wrecks and roadside memorials. The kinds with plastic flowers bleached by the Texas sun. But truckers and night drivers talk about something else entirely. They talk about the bus. Always a school bus, always yellow, riding too clean for the dirt shoulder it pulls from, as if it were polished in some other time and slipped here by mistake. The stories line up too neatly across the years to be dismissed as barroom gossip. Men and women who never met tell it the same way. First, they see headlights too high for a car, the glow hanging steady in the mirrors, then the long rectangular body easing into their lane. A school bus where no bus should be, this late, this far from town. It drifts parallel for a while, windows bright, every seat filled with children. The kids don't sit still. They wave, they grin, they press their palms flat against the glass like they want to climb out and join you. Then, when you blink, when you glance away for just 1 second, the bus surges ahead, turns a corner it shouldn't be able to turn, and vanishes. And in your rear view, where taillights should be, the bus is swallowed by fire. A silent fireball swelling fast and then gone, leaving only black road behind. Ray McCormick wasn't a man prone to superstition. He drove long haul up from Laredo through Waco at least once a week, his Kenworth rattling like a tin can on its last legs. He didn't drink on the road, didn't pick up hitchhikers, didn't scare easy, but he carried the look of a man who had seen something that refused to leave him. He told the story once to a waitress at a truck stop south of town, and only once. She said his hands shook on the coffee mug the whole time. According to Ray, the night was humid, crickets humming like wires under the dark. He had been watching the shimmer of heat lightning when the bus came up on his left, rolling smooth as glass. He said he noticed the driver first, a tall man with his face hidden in shadow, hands white-knuckled on the wheel. The interior lights burned bright, every kid's face clear, almost too clear, like they were close enough to breathe on him. The children were all waving. Some of them had ribbons in their hair. Some had old-fashioned lunchboxes in their laps. Ray swore one boy's mouth kept opening and closing like he was trying to yell. But no sound carried through the glass. Then the bus picked up speed and cut across his lane without so much as a signal. Ray hit his brakes and clutched the wheel until his veins bulged. In the mirror, he saw it erupt, a blossom of fire brighter than daylight, swallowing the rear tires, lifting the body upward. No sound, no shockwave, just gone. When he pulled over shaking, the highway was empty, the air calm. Not even smoke. Locals whisper that back in 1959, a school bus full of kids from a Baptist church picnic never made it home. Rain had washed out part of a county road near the Brazos, and the driver tried to cross anyway. The bridge collapsed. The bus plunged into the water nose first and rolled. They say all 43 kids drowned, trapped behind glass they couldn't break. The driver's body was never found. Old clippings exist, but they're hard to dig up, and the county records office denies anything like that happened. Some folks say the families were told to hush it up, that the town couldn't bear the stain of so much death. But ask any older hand at the Waco diner and you'll see them stiffen at the mention. Ask around Lake Waco at night, and fishermen will tell you the fog sometimes carries the sound of laughter, tinny and far, as if leaking from a bus radio sunk deep beneath the water. One September, a pair of Baylor students swore they chased the bus. They had been drinking maybe, but their account matched too much of what came before. They said they tailed the school bus for 3 exits, always staying a few car lengths back. They joked about how creepy it looked, how none of the kids blinked. Then the road curved and the bus should have reappeared on the straightaway. Instead, nothing, just blacktop. When they checked their dashcam later, the recording showed the taillights leading them on clear as day, but the fireball didn't make it to film. The feed cut to static and stayed that way until they stopped at a gas station. The rest of the drive was gone, eaten out of the memory card like it had never been there. Every year, another trucker, another late-shift driver, another teenager cutting home after curfew adds their voice. Always the same ending. The bus explodes in silence. Some say if you pull over and wait, If you walk back down the highway to the spot where you saw the fire, you'll find the air hot as breath, even on a cold night. Some say you'll hear tapping on glass, faint but steady, until you run back to your car. The children are trying to get out. They've been trying for decades, and the driver, the tall shadow with the pale hands, is still at the wheel, guiding them from one unlucky witness to the next. They say once you see the bus, you don't stop seeing it. It finds you again. Maybe on a different stretch of road, maybe when you're too tired to keep your eyes open. The children will wave until you wave back, and then one night when you glance away, you'll feel a heat at your back hotter than the Texas sun, and you'll know the bus is behind you, closer than your own shadow, burning where no flame should be, waiting for you to follow it down into the dark water. The stink hits you before you even see it. On some stretches of I-10, out past the blinking lights of Beaumont and before the desolate fields give way to the outskirts of Baytown, the air turns sour, heavy with gasoline. It burns the back of your throat, makes your tongue taste like copper and grease. Truckers talk about it, though never for long, and only when the road is behind them. They say if you pull over where the smell is strongest, the ground itself is slick, black, and wet, bubbling like it's boiling from the inside out. Most folks roll up their windows and drive on, ignoring it the way you ignore roadkill or busted tires. But if you've ever been alone out there at night, with no one else on the road for miles and the reek starts creeping through the vents, you feel the urge to stop, like something tugging at your gut. That's how it got me. It was late, close to midnight, and I was running on fumes both in my car and my body. I'd been driving straight through from San Antonio, chasing hours I didn't really have, trying to make it to Houston before dawn. The dash needle hovered near empty, and I'd passed the last gas station 20 miles back. The kind with flickering yellow lights and a clerk who looked at you like you were already a ghost. I told myself I could push through, but when that smell started bleeding into the cabin, I thought I was imagining it. I rolled down the window and it hit me in full. Gasoline, thick and raw, like I'd parked inside a refinery. And then I saw it. The shoulder of the highway shimmered in the moonlight, a wide smear of black stretching into the weeds, bubbling in pockets as though the earth itself were cooking. Steam rose in thin white ribbons. My first thought was a tanker must have wrecked here, spilled its load, and the sun baked it until it started seeping back out of the ground. But the asphalt wasn't burned. There were no skid marks, no twisted wreckage, just that black moving slick. Against every sane instinct, I slowed and pulled over, half thinking maybe I could scoop some into a can and limp to the next station. Desperation makes you stupid like that. The smell outside was worse, a choking fog that clawed at the back of my throat. I covered my nose with my sleeve and stepped out. The sound was what unsettled me most. Not just the bubbling of the ground, but the faint hiss underneath, like air leaking from something buried deep. The slick stretched farther than I'd noticed from the car, vanishing into the grass and pooling in the low ditch. The weeds were all dead there, brittle and blackened as though scorched, though no flame had touched them. My headlights cut a pale cone through the dark, and in that light the surface of the slick shimmered like a living skin. I crouched and touched it with the tip of my boot. Warm. Too warm. Like touching the hood of a car that had just been shut off. That was when I heard it. A sound like a voice, faint and muffled, rising up through the bubbling. At first I thought it was the hiss of pressure, my brain twisting it into words, but no. The longer I listened, the clearer it became. Not words exactly, but cries choked and garbled. Like someone screaming through a mouthful of water. My stomach tightened. I stepped back, shaking my head, telling myself it was the road, the wind, my tired mind. But then the ground shifted. Not a quake, not even a tremor. Just a subtle flex under the soles of my boots, as though something large and heavy moved beneath the surface. The bubbling grew faster, angrier, spitting droplets that burned the skin of my ankle where they landed. The smell sharpened until my eyes watered. And then I saw a shape just for an instant pressing against the black surface from below. A face. Distorted, stretched thin, features warped like they were pressed against glass. Its mouth opened in a silent scream before the slick rippled and it was gone. I stumbled back toward the car, heart hammering. The voices rose then, louder. Dozens of them overlapping, some shrill, some guttural, all desperate. They clawed at me in a chorus of pain that had no language. My headlights flickered. I spun, half certain something was standing behind me, but the road was empty, stretching black in both directions. Only the bubbling remained, and the smell, so thick now it coated my tongue. I lunged for the driver's side door, but when I grabbed the handle it was slick, wet with the black liquid, as though the air itself was dripping with it. I yanked the door open anyway and slammed inside, trying not to breathe. The engine turned once, twice, then sputtered out. Dead. The dash lights glowed dim red, then winked into darkness. I sat there, gripping the wheel, shaking as the voices pressed closer. Through the windshield, I saw them rising now, figures half-formed in the bubbling slick. Faces, arms, torsos clawing upward only to sink again, dissolving into tar. They didn't have eyes, only hollow sockets, but I felt their gaze pressing through the glass through me. I don't remember deciding to do it, but I threw the door open and ran. The road was empty, silent except for the shriek of cicadas far off in the fields. I ran until my lungs burned, until the smell thinned and the night air was clean again. When I looked back, my car was just a dim silhouette, and the black patch on the ground was nothing more than shadow in the distance. No bubbling, no steam, no figures, just the hum of the highway stretching endless behind me. I walked the rest of the way, hours until dawn, until a passing trucker picked me up outside Winnie. He didn't ask why I was on foot, and I didn't tell him. But when the wind shifted and the faintest whiff of gasoline crept through the cracked window, I saw him stiffen, grip the wheel tighter. He didn't roll the window down, didn't speak, just stared at the road as though something might rise up out of it at any moment. I never saw the car again. A week later, I called the tow company out that way, asked if they'd picked up a dead sedan on I-10. The dispatcher paused, then told me nothing was there. No vehicle, no trace, just empty shoulder mile after mile. But sometimes, when the night's quiet and the air outside smells faintly of oil, I hear those voices again. Burbling up from nowhere, crying and gasping like something trapped beneath the ground, begging to be pulled free. I tell myself it's memory, that my mind is just replaying what it shouldn't have seen. But I've driven I-10 since, and every time I keep my eyes straight ahead. Windows rolled tight, and I never ever stop, no matter how empty the tank runs. Because I know if I look too long at that slick black ground, I might see my own face staring back. The highway between Austin and Houston is long and flat, bordered by fields of dying grass, rusting barbed wire fences, and the occasional gas station that looks like it hasn't been renovated since the 70s. Driving it at night is different from driving it in the day. In the daylight, the heat and the monotony wear on you, but at night the darkness swallows the road until your headlights carve out a narrow tunnel, and the black horizon seems endless. That was where David found himself one Friday in late October, pushing his tired little Ford down the interstate at nearly midnight. His eyes were heavy from the hours of driving, and he'd started to see the faint shimmering waves of fatigue on the edges of his vision. When he spotted the glowing green highway sign that promised a rest stop 2 miles ahead, he felt relief stronger than it should have been. The rest stop was one of those standard Texas roadside facilities, the kind you could almost draw from memory. A long pull-through parking lot with a scattering of semis humming in their sleep. A few cars parked crookedly near the front, and the squat rectangular building with the bathrooms, vending machines, and an empty visitor brochure rack. A lone floodlight buzzed overhead, shining down on cracked pavement that bore oil stains older than most of the travelers. David parked near the side, rolled his stiff shoulders, and got out. The air was cold in a dry way, the kind that made your breath visible only when you exhaled slowly. He entered the men's room, and immediately that familiar smell hit him, a mix of bleach, mold, and stale urine. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed in a constant electric drone, and the mirrors above the sinks were cracked and clouded, giving distorted reflections that looked more like paintings than actual faces. David washed his hands just to give himself something to do. Listening to the water gurgle down the rusted drains, he glanced at his reflection. The bags under his eyes seemed darker than he remembered. Behind him, the row of stalls was quiet, their gray metal doors hanging slightly crooked on hinges that squeaked when moved. He noticed something odd then. From the corner stall at the far end, shadows pooled thicker than they should have. It wasn't just the absence of light. It was as though the darkness there was heavier, almost alive. David blinked, thinking maybe it was his fatigue, but the shape didn't go away. It seemed to lean tall and narrow, as if someone impossibly lanky were standing there in the stall waiting. He stared longer than he meant to, his heart ticking up until one of the fluorescent lights above him flickered and buzzed violently, snapping him out of it. He told himself it was just the light playing tricks, wiped his damp hands on his jeans, and turned to leave. On his way out, he felt a subtle pressure like eyes on his back. He stopped at the door, half expecting to hear movement, a foot shuffle, a door creak. Nothing came. Just the low buzz of the lights and the faint gurgle of one of the toilets refilling. He exhaled sharply and stepped back outside into the cold night. He tried to brush it off. Everyone gets spooked alone in bathrooms, he told himself. Places like that are made for discomfort, echoing tiles, broken locks, the whole thing. He bought a Coke from the vending machine, sat in his car and scrolled his phone for a few minutes, trying to reset his nerves. The Coke was cold and sharp in his throat, and he felt a little better. He figured he'd rest for 15 minutes and get back on the road. But the problem was his body wasn't cooperating. His eyes grew heavier. His chest sank into the driver's seat, and before long he found himself drifting off into a shallow, restless sleep. He wasn't sure how long he was out when a sound pulled him awake. A faint metallic squeal like a bathroom stall door swinging on bad hinges. He sat upright in his car, heart pounding, looking around the lot. The semis still sat silently, their engines humming low. One other car had pulled in, a white sedan, but there was no one visible outside it. The building stood still and square under the buzzing floodlight. Nothing moved. He told himself it was just a dream, maybe some noise from the building's pipes, and leaned back again. That was when he noticed something strange. In the farthest corner of the lot, near the tree line where the light barely reached, there was a figure standing. It was tall, impossibly so, its head almost brushing the bottom of the floodlight if it were closer, but it wasn't shaped right. Too narrow in the shoulders, too long in the arms, too still. David blinked, rubbed his eyes. When he looked again, the figure was gone. He could have driven off right then. He could have started the car, pulled out, and told himself he imagined the whole thing. But instead, almost against his will, he found himself climbing out of the car and walking back toward the building as though he needed proof that he wasn't losing his mind. The Coke can crumpled slightly in his hand from how tightly he was holding it. Inside the bathroom, the lights buzzed louder than before, like a swarm of insects pressed against the ceiling. The mirrors seemed foggier, the air heavier, and the stall at the far end was still shut tight. David froze because he could see plain as day a set of feet beneath the door, but they weren't right. They were too long, too black, like stretched shadows pinned against the tile. They didn't move, didn't shift, didn't fidget the way a person's feet would. His breath caught. He thought about calling out, saying hello, asking if someone was in there, but something primal in him screamed not to. The silence pressed in, and the only sound was his pulse pounding in his ears. He took a step back, and the stall door creaked just slightly, as though something inside had leaned against it. That was enough. He turned and bolted out the door, the fluorescent buzzing chasing him out into the cold. He was halfway to his car when he heard the door to the bathroom creak open behind him. He didn't want to look, but he did. The door was wide open now, and though no figure stepped through, the shadows inside seemed to leak outward, stretching farther than the light should have allowed. David jumped into his car, started it with trembling hands, and peeled out of the lot. He drove fast, too fast for miles without stopping until the rest stop was long gone in his rearview mirror. Only then did he dare look at himself in the mirror above the dashboard. For a moment his reflection looked normal, his pale face, his wide eyes, the damp shine of sweat on his skin. But then something shifted. Behind his shoulder, in the dim glow of his car's interior lights, a tall, narrow shape leaned in from the darkness of the back seat. Too tall for the car, its head bent sideways, its arms draped like shadows. He swerved violently, almost crashing off the road, and when he glanced back again, the seat was empty. He drove the rest of the night in silence, too afraid to stop, too afraid to close his eyes. But sometimes in the corner of his vision, he swore he saw something shifting in the shadows of the roadside trees, keeping pace with him, always too tall, always too quiet, waiting for the next place he had to stop. The highway between Dallas and Texarkana feels like it stretches longer than it should when you drive it at night. Long miles of flat asphalt, black as a strip of tar laid across scrub grass and cow pastures, with only the occasional glow of a farmhouse lamp or the pale wash of headlights from a car coming the other way. Out there in the gaps between towns where the road hums under your tires and the air outside feels colder than it should for Texas, strange things can happen. That's where people started talking about the toll booth, a booth that wasn't supposed to exist. No one ever saw it in the daytime. If you drove the stretch of highway between Mount Pleasant and Jefferson in the sunlight, you'd see nothing but the ordinary rhythm of exits, rest stops, and the long fences of ranch land. But if you happened to be out there after midnight, Somewhere in that dead stretch where the road curved around a stand of pine trees and dipped across a low creek bed, you might see a yellow light ahead. Not headlights, not a truck stop sign. A square little shack with a single dirty bulb burning over the glass window. A booth planted in the middle of nowhere, straddling the lane like it had been built decades ago and forgotten by the Department of Transportation. Drivers would slow because they thought it was a checkpoint or some kind of roadblock. Inside the booth sat a man you couldn't quite see clearly. He never said much, just held out his hand through the slot and waited. Most people gave him whatever bills or coins they had. He didn't name a price, didn't print a receipt, just closed his fist around the money and nodded. Then the striped wooden arm across the lane would crank upward with a rusty squeal, and the driver would roll on, a little unsettled but relieved. And then, a minute or two down the road when they glanced back in the rear view, the booth wasn't there. Just empty asphalt. No glow of yellow light, no shack, no man, no arm. The first time I heard the story, I thought it was just trucker talk. Rumors to spook rookies on the night hauls. But then I met a man at a gas station outside Longview who told me he'd handed over a 20 to the booth, and when he checked his wallet at the next stop, the bill had come back. Not just come back, but folded in half and tucked under his driver's license, marked with something black across its surface. A circle with 3 lines cutting through it, drawn in ink that smeared like it was still wet. He swore the booth had returned his own money with that mark. Said he kept it for a while but burned it after a month when he started hearing knocks at his apartment door at 3 a.m. Another story came from a woman who claimed her husband never came home after passing the booth. His car was found idling on the shoulder 10 miles past the pine stand. Driver's door open, headlights on. The wallet sat on the dash, empty, no cash or cards inside. No sign of a struggle. No footprints leading into the grass. The police wrote it off as abandonment. She swore otherwise. Said he'd called her from the road only 20 minutes before, telling her in a shaken voice that something strange had just happened, that he needed to get home fast. His voice broke mid-sentence and the line went dead. I tried not to think about these stories when I found myself driving that same stretch one night after a late shift. I was bone-tired and the darkness out there feels thicker than in town, like a weight pressing against the windows. Around 2 a.m, I saw it. A square glow ahead, unnatural on the empty road. The booth, small, wooden, the paint peeling, the bulb buzzing like a dying insect. The striped arm stretched across my lane. My heart banged in my chest, but I slowed anyway, rolling up alongside the glass. The man inside was shadowed. His face seemed half turned away, though I couldn't see from what. He extended his hand through the slot, pale and still. I had nothing smaller than a 10, so I folded it once and passed it over. His fingers closed around it with a strange slowness, like the joints were stiff. He didn't look at me, didn't speak. The arm creaked upward and I drove on. For 10 miles I told myself it was some old forgotten checkpoint, maybe an unofficial thing someone left standing. But when I finally glanced back in the mirror, my mouth went dry. Nothing was there. No shack, no light, just empty highway fading into dark trees. At the next gas station I pulled over, shaking. I opened my wallet. The $10 bill was there. Not in the cash pocket, but folded and slipped beneath my driver's license, marked with that black circle and 3 crossing lines. I dropped it on the seat like it had burned me. That was 3 months ago. Since then, I hear things in the night. Tires crunching gravel outside my house when there's nothing in the driveway. Knocks on the door at impossible hours. Last week, I woke to find the marked bill back in my wallet again. Though I had thrown it into the Red River myself, watched the water carry it downstream. I don't sleep much anymore. When I close my eyes, I see that booth glowing in the dark, waiting in the middle of the road. I know one night soon I'll have to drive that way again, and when I do, I don't think handing over money will be enough. Something else waits at that booth, something that isn't finished with me. And when you're out there late at night, between Mount Pleasant and Jefferson, if you see that faint yellow glow ahead, do yourself a favor. Don't stop. Don't slow down. Drive through the arm if you have to. Because whatever that man in the booth is, he's not taking your money. He's marking you. The truckers always said it began outside El Paso, where the desert rolls flat and black under a sky swollen with dust, the wind pushing hard enough to make the rigs sway on their axles. They called her the Screamer, a woman who kept pace with 18-wheelers in the middle of the night, face pressed against the passenger side glass, hair whipped wild in the current, mouth stretched open like a torn wound. No headlights, no car beside you, just her staring in. Like she had been there the whole time and you had only just noticed. Most dismissed it as road talk, the kind of ghost story passed around at truck stops to keep new drivers from dozing off. But there were enough swears on Bibles and enough men who refused to run the night route through El Paso anymore that the tale settled into something harder than rumor. It was Martin who told me first, back when I was running overnight loads from Dallas to Phoenix. We were parked at a fuel station near Van Horn, the sodium lights buzzing over us, moths hitting the glass. He said it without any drama, like he was reporting a mechanical issue. That calm way he said it is what stuck with me. He had been on I-10 heading west, 2 a.m, radio dead, when he caught movement at the corner of his eye. A pale hand against the glass. Then a face pressed flat, eyes black and staring straight ahead, mouth open in a silent howl. He claimed she hung there for miles, keeping up even at 75, until he pulled onto the shoulder and nearly jackknifed trying to stop. When he did, she was gone. He told me he wouldn't take El Paso at night anymore, said it wasn't worth the freight. I laughed it off until the night it happened to me. I had a refrigerated load of produce out of Houston, bound for Tucson. It was late October, one of those nights where the wind came out of nowhere, pushing grit across the highway in sheets. The CB was quiet. Most of the other drivers probably bedded down. I had just cleared El Paso, past the scattered glow of its suburbs, when I felt the first tug. Not of the wheel, but in my chest. The kind of dread you don't recognize at first, just a tightening in the gut that makes you sit up straighter. The desert was a black ocean on either side, broken only by the occasional sign reflecting back my high beams. Then came the sound, faint at first, like the squeal of rubber against glass. I glanced right. At first I thought it was just a reflection, some weird play of the cabin lights. But no. There she was. A face pressed against the passenger window. Skin pale as chalk, mouth open, but no scream I could hear. Only that horrible stretching silence. Her eyes were wide, unblinking, and fixed forward as though the road itself had her hypnotized. Her hair streamed back, not like it was blowing in wind, but like she was underwater. Strands lifting and drifting in currents I couldn't see. I slammed the brakes, heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst through my ribs. The rig bucked and moaned, tires squealing against asphalt. For a second I lost control, the trailer fishtailing before I yanked it back. When the truck stopped, I just sat there, sweat running cold down my back. The passenger seat was empty, window clear. I told myself it was fatigue, hallucination. I had been awake too long, pushing too many miles. I kept the engine idling while I lit a cigarette with shaking hands. But as I leaned forward, staring into the mirror, I swore I caught something behind the trailer. Just a flicker of movement, a pale shape slipping out of the glow of my brake lights. I didn't sleep that night. Drove until dawn. After that, I started hearing more. Not just from Martin. Guys at truck stops who wouldn't talk about her directly, only shake their heads and mutter about the woman. Some said she had been a hitchhiker murdered on the highway years ago. Others swore she was a banshee from Mexico, drawn to the border. One man told me she was an echo of every woman left to die in the desert. Their screams fused into one ghost. But none of those stories captured the worst part. The screamer doesn't just show herself, she stays with you. I learned that weeks later, parked at a rest area outside Las Cruces. I had been dozing in the bunk when I woke to the sound of tapping on glass. Not a knock, not the creak of wind. A steady, deliberate tapping as if someone's nail were dragging against the passenger side window. My stomach dropped. I didn't even look, just stared at the ceiling of the cab, listening. It went on for minutes, scratching, dragging, tapping. When I finally worked up the courage to look, there was nothing. After that, she was everywhere. Reflected in mirrors, seen for half a second in the chrome of a tanker truck passing me. Always that same face, mouth stretched, eyes dead. I stopped sleeping more than an hour at a time. I caught myself muttering out loud, begging her to leave me alone. I started to wonder if maybe that was the point. Maybe she wasn't just a ghost. Maybe she was something older, something that latched onto drivers because we were trapped out there on those endless roads with nowhere to run. The last time I saw her was on a night run back through El Paso. The wind was screaming across the desert, shaking the rig, and my chest felt like it was going to split open. I had been awake 30 hours, maybe more. Somewhere past the outskirts, I felt it before I saw it, that pressure like the air had been sucked out of the cab. I turned my head slow like a man already condemned, and there she was again, closer than ever, pressed flat against the glass. Her eyes moved this time, turning toward me, and for the first time, I heard her. Not a scream. Not at first. A low, rattling breath like air forced through a broken throat. Then the sound rose higher, until it became a shriek that filled the cab, piercing, vibrating in my teeth. I swerved hard enough that I nearly flipped. The scream didn't stop when she vanished. It stayed in my ears, like it had burrowed into me. I don't run nights anymore, I barely run at all. Most days I sit in my trailer outside El Paso and listen to the wind. Sometimes it's just wind. Sometimes it carries something else. A shriek so faint you can almost tell yourself you imagined it. But the truckers know. They still talk about her, passing the story along to new drivers. They say if you see her once, you're cursed. She'll keep coming back, closer each time until finally she doesn't let go. They say when rigs are found, jackknifed and empty on the desert highway, no driver in sight, no footprints leading away, that's her work. The screamer of El Paso still out there keeping pace in the dark. And I believe them. Because every night, no matter how far I run, no matter how many locks I throw on the doors, I can hear her outside, dragging her nails across the glass, waiting for me to look. The rest stop off Highway 287 didn't look like much. A single row of sodium lights buzzing against the early spring night. A handful of dented vending machines glowing behind scratched plexiglass. And a line of picnic tables where weeds had started pushing up through the cracks. Beyond the fence, flat Texas scrub stretched until it melted into darkness. Marcus had been driving since dawn, his eyes burning from the monotony of the road, the endless grain fields, and the occasional towns that were more gas station than community. He told himself he'd only close his eyes for an hour, just long enough to push the ache out of his back and the lead out of his eyelids. His old Honda wheezed into a spot beneath one of the lights, and when he cut the engine, the sudden silence pressed hard against his ears. He reclined the seat, cracked the window, and let the dry air roll in. A faint smell of burnt rubber lingered around the rest area, as if some trucker had braked too hard earlier in the night. He tried not to notice how empty it was. No cars, no semis idling, just the whisper of the wind across asphalt. That alone should have unnerved him. Rest stops were rarely deserted, but Marcus was too far gone into exhaustion to care. He leaned back, told himself it was safe, and drifted into a shallow, troubled sleep. The first sting woke him. Small, sharp, like someone had pressed a lit match to his skin. He jerked upright, hand slapping at his forearm, but nothing was there. His arm stung, though. More than a sting, really, it throbbed. He reached for the overhead light and froze. The bulb wouldn't come on. He tried the switch again. Nothing. Outside, the parking lot light hummed, still alive, but inside the Honda it was dark as a coffin. Marcus pulled out his phone and used the screen glow. That's when he saw it, a round, angry welt on his forearm, ringed pink and bubbling in the center exactly like a cigarette burn. He stared, dumbfounded. He didn't smoke. He hadn't been around anyone who did. The skin was fresh, tender, almost weeping. He swore under his breath, rubbed at it, and tried to come up with some explanation. Maybe he had scratched himself in his sleep and it looked worse than it was. Maybe. He shoved the phone back down and decided he was imagining things. Just road weariness making monsters out of shadows. He reclined again. Another sting came a few minutes later, this time on his other arm. He yelped, sat bolt upright, and this time he caught a smell. Faint, acrid, unmistakable. The smell of a cigarette burning hot. He swung the phone around, scanning the car. Nothing. Just his duffel on the passenger seat and the empty coffee cup rattling in the holder. But the smell lingered. Stronger now, as if someone had exhaled smoke right in front of his face. The welt on his second arm was worse. Raw, already blistering. Marcus's hands trembled as he locked the doors, though he knew how pointless that was. He pressed his back against the driver's side door and listened. At first, just silence, then faintly the creak of leather. a seat shifting. He snapped his head to the back seat. His phone beam cut across it. Empty. Nothing but shadows pooling in the corners. But he knew what he'd heard. The sound of someone moving back there, settling into the seat like an invisible passenger who had been waiting all along. He decided to leave. Whatever this was, dream, hallucination, prank, he wasn't staying here. He jammed the key into the ignition. The Honda coughed, sputtered, then died. He tried again. Click, click, dead silence. The dashboard lights refused to glow. Panic sharpened, dry and metallic at the back of his tongue. He shoved the door open, stumbled out under the buzzing floodlight and sucked in the night air as though that alone could keep him awake, keep him safe. The smell of cigarette smoke followed him, curling into the air from nowhere, weaving itself into the wind. Marcus stood in the middle of the rest stop lot, turning in circles, searching for anyone, anything. The vending machines still glowed, humming softly, but their light looked distant, cold like reflections in water. The picnic tables were empty. Beyond the fence, the prairie seemed endless, as though it had swallowed the world. He looked back at his Honda. Through the windshield, for a fraction of a second, he thought he saw a glow. A small orange ember hovering in the driver's seat, pulsing faintly like someone taking a drag. He blinked and it was gone. The burns kept appearing. He didn't feel them all at once, but every time he looked, another angry blister had surfaced. On his forearm, his neck, even the back of his hand. He swore he hadn't felt them, but the pain was undeniable, hot and deep, as if each one had been pressed into him with deliberate cruelty. He rubbed furiously at his arms, the raw smell of cooked skin rising around him. He staggered toward the vending machines, maybe thinking someone would appear, maybe hoping the lights there would protect him. Halfway across the lot, his legs went out. He hit the pavement, breath ragged, arms clutching his chest where another fresh burn seared into the skin above his heart. He looked up, and the sky above him seemed lower, heavy with smoke that hadn't been there before. Not mist, not cloud. Smoke, curling in long ribbons. The smell of it choked him, and he saw shadows moving inside it. Vague outlines of figures leaning forward, dragging long breaths. The faint glow of dozens of cigarettes lighting and dying, lighting and dying. He heard whispers too, broken laughter and the scratch of matches striking. The shadows leaned closer. The smoke thickened. He felt the next burn bloom on his cheek, bright and unbearable, and then another on his wrist. He tried to crawl, but his palms blistered as though unseen hands had ground cigarettes into them. The vending machines flickered. The lights buzzed and died. The rest area was swallowed in darkness except for those faint, pulsing embers drifting in the air around him. He screamed once, a hoarse, choked sound. Then another burn silenced him. His vision blurred, then dimmed. And the last thing he saw was a dozen glowing embers circling him like eyes in the dark. When a state trooper pulled into that rest stop 2 days later, his headlights fell on an old Honda with the driver's door hanging open. The lot was empty otherwise. No sign of a struggle, no blood. Just the faint, lingering smell of cigarettes, stale and sour, heavy enough to make the officer cough. Inside the car, he found a duffel bag, an empty coffee cup, and a cell phone with the battery dead. The seats were stained with something dark and greasy like melted plastic. On the driver's side headrest, small circular burns marked the fabric in a neat line, as if someone had been leaning forward, pressing one cigarette after another, patient and methodical, long into the night. It was on a stretch of old highway between Huntsville and Livingston, the kind of road where the grass grows tall in the cracks along the shoulder, and the billboards lean at broken angles, advertising barbecue joints that have been closed for decades. I had been driving since noon, the September heat pressing down so heavy it felt like a hand on the back of my neck. The pine trees on either side swayed with the kind of lazy menace you only notice when you're alone, and the radio had given out to static about 20 miles back. I hadn't seen another car in over an hour when I noticed them, a family on the roadside waving me down. There were 4 of them, 2 adults and 2 kids standing in a patch of sunburned grass just off the asphalt. They were all dressed as if it were Easter Sunday. The father in a buttoned-up shirt that clung to his chest with sweat. The mother in a pale yellow dress that looked starched stiff. The kids in little church clothes that seemed too clean for this kind of road. A blanket was spread out on the grass beside them, and there was food laid out, a whole picnic. Fried chicken, corn on the cob, potato salad in a glass bowl, a pitcher of what looked like lemonade sweating in the heat. But the thing that struck me even before I pulled the car over was the way they all smiled. wide, stretched grins that didn't flicker or falter, as though they'd been waiting for me all along. I slowed down without thinking, as if the decision had been made for me. Something in their wave, slow, deliberate, synchronized, was impossible to ignore. I rolled down the window as the father stepped forward, his smile so wide I could see the pink of his gums. "Hot day for driving," he said, his voice syrupy and low. "Why don't you join us? Take a load off." I glanced at the spread on the blanket again. That's when I noticed the food wasn't right. The fried chicken was crawling, not with ants, but with something thicker, white and writhing. Maggots twisting through the meat like it had been sitting there in the sun for weeks. The potato salad was slick with a film that shimmered with tiny black flies, their wings glinting like shards of glass. Even the lemonade pitcher had movement in it, pale shapes rising and falling beneath the surface like drowned worms. The children were holding sandwiches in their small hands, smiling, not eating, just holding them out like offerings. "I appreciate it," I said, forcing a polite smile, "but I should really keep going. Got a ways to drive tonight." The father tilted his head, still smiling. His eyes didn't match the grin. They were flat, colorless like river stones. The mother spoke then, her voice almost a whisper but carrying all the same, as if the air itself had been waiting to carry her words. "It's rude to turn down a meal when it's offered, son. We've been waiting." The kids giggled, though their mouths didn't move, and the sound of it was too loud, too close, as though it were coming from the inside of the car. My stomach tightened. The air smelled now. Not faintly, but strong, rotten sweet, like something had been dead for a long time in the ditch grass. I shifted the car into gear. The father's hand dropped to the hood of my car, just resting there like he was calming a nervous horse. His skin was grayish in the light, and when I looked closer, I saw that his fingernails weren't nails at all but hard, darkened ridges, almost like claws. His smile never faltered. "Just one bite," he said. "That's all it takes." Behind him, the children raised their sandwiches higher, and for a second I thought I saw something moving inside the bread, pressing against it like hands behind thin paper. The mother bent down, picking up a drumstick from the pile. Maggots poured off it in streams, wriggling across her pale wrist, dropping onto the blanket with faint wet sounds, but she held it up as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I slammed the accelerator. The father's hand stayed on the hood as I pulled forward, stretching longer than it should have, his arm impossibly extending. The grin fixed. It was only after I'd swerved into the opposite lane and roared past that it snapped back with a sound I felt in my teeth. The rearview mirror showed them still standing there, waving. The blanket spread neat as ever, not a speck of movement in sight now. The food looked perfectly normal. Golden fried chicken, bright corn, clear lemonade, a family picnic, as if nothing had happened. I didn't stop driving until I hit Livingston, and even then, the heat felt heavier than before. I parked in a gas station, hands shaking, and went inside to wash my face. When I came back, there on my windshield was a single piece of bread, 2 small bites taken out of it, and the faintest smear of something dark and wet across the crust. That night in the cheap motel off the highway, I dreamed of them. The father standing at the foot of the bed, the mother at the door, the children on either side. Each smiling, each holding something out to me. When I woke, my mouth tasted of rotten earth, and there was a crumb on the pillow, pale with movement. I brushed it away, but it burrowed into the sheets before I could catch it. The highway out past Midland is a cruel one, the kind that runs flat and straight for so long you start to doubt the earth curves at all. I had been driving since San Antonio, following a trucking job lead that I wasn't even sure was real. Just a number scribbled on a napkin at a bar from a guy who smelled like diesel and whiskey. The radio had gone to static an hour back, the kind of dry, rattling hiss that eats at your nerves until you shut it off and settle for the sound of your own tires and the hum of the engine. I hadn't seen another set of headlights in close to 40 minutes, and my fuel gauge was dipping into the red. I kept telling myself there would be a town, a truck stop, something. But it was only more blacktop, more dust, and more heat bleeding out of the road. That's when the sign showed up. It leaned on a rusted pole a little ways off the shoulder, bulbs sputtering inside the letters like half-dead fireflies. Last gas for 200 miles. The paint was peeling, the words sun-bleached, but they were there, glowing like salvation in the dark. I slowed, easing onto the gravel track it pointed toward. My tires crunched on loose stone and dust swirled up behind me like smoke. The road bent around a patch of mesquite trees, and then there it was, the gas station, sitting under a flickering yellow bulb that swung in the evening wind. place looked ancient. The kind of station you saw in movies set in the 50s. 2 steel pumps, their numbers frozen in faded red paint, stood beneath a corrugated tin canopy. The building itself was squat, with a single dirty window and a Coke machine leaning dead against the wall. A door with peeling green paint stood half open. There was a silence to the place, not just the natural quiet of the desert, but a thicker thing, as though the crickets and coyotes had decided they didn't want to be anywhere near it. I cut the engine and the world seemed to go still. When I stepped out, the air smelled of hot oil and something faintly metallic like rust or blood. I lifted the pump handle, half expecting it to be locked or dry, but it gave way with a reluctant squeal. The numbers spun slowly, ticking louder than they should, the sound sharp in the silence. Gasoline flowed and my heart eased a little. Whatever else the place was, at least the pumps worked. That's when the door opened. A man stepped out, wiping his hands on a rag. He was old, but not in the way of most old men. His frame was tall, shoulders stooped, skin pale as bone even in the dim yellow light. His hair was gray, slicked back with oil or sweat, and his eyes caught the light in a way I didn't like. A shine that looked more animal than human. He smiled, but it wasn't right. His teeth were too even, too white like dentures, though his lips were cracked and his face was lined deep. "Evenin'," he said, his voice slow and gravelly. "Long way out for a fill-up." I nodded, pretending calm. "Yeah, I wasn't sure I'd make it. Sign said last gas for 200. His smile widened, just enough to make the skin at the corners of his mouth split slightly. "That's right. Last gas for 200. You're lucky you found it." I paid in cash because there was no card slot on the pump, and when he reached out to take the bills, his fingers brushed mine. They were too cold, clammy despite the heat of the night, and I pulled back quicker than I meant to. He chuckled at that, low and dry, like he was humored by the way people flinched around him. "You didn't make it here, though," he said. His eyes held mine, and the words didn't sound like a joke. "What?" I asked, unsure if I'd misheard. "You didn't make it here. That's the way it works." He stuffed the bills into his pocket without looking, the rag still dangling from his other hand. "You'll fill up, you'll drive on, and by morning you'll tell yourself you just dreamed this place. But you didn't make it here. Remember that?" I forced a laugh, though it came out thin. "Sure, whatever you say." I finished filling the tank, replaced the nozzle, and got back in the truck, not wanting to linger. When I pulled back onto the highway, I looked in the rear view, half expecting the lights to vanish like smoke, but they stayed there, flickering dim against the night. I told myself the guy was just some weirdo playing mind games, trying to spook travelers for his own amusement. It worked, though. Every mile I drove, I thought about his voice, those words. "You didn't make it here." An hour later, I saw it. An 18-wheeler sitting sideways across the highway, its headlights blazing but the cab door wide open. I slowed, heart hammering, because it blocked both lanes and there was no easy way around. The trailer was jackknifed, tires half sunk in the sand of the shoulder. The name on the side had been painted over years ago, leaving only shadows of letters no one could read. I climbed out, the desert wind whipping at my shirt, and called out, but there was no answer. The truck's engine was still running, a low rumble like a dying animal. Inside, the cab was empty, though the driver's seat was worn smooth, the ashtray full, and a thermos sat open on the floor, still steaming faintly. It hadn't been there long, but there was something else. The smell. Not just diesel, not just grease, but something sour and sweet underneath. A smell that made my stomach turn. I checked the sleeper bunk, found nothing but blankets twisted up like someone had left in a hurry. No sign of the driver. When I stepped back out, I noticed the highway stretched empty in both directions. No lights behind me, no lights ahead. It was as if the world had emptied out. I climbed back in my truck, shoved the gear, and managed to grind past the 18-wheeler onto the shoulder, tires spitting gravel as I cleared it. In the mirror, I watched its headlights dwindle until they were swallowed by the dark. But as the miles went on, something sank deeper in me, like a weight pulling down on my chest. I kept glancing at the gauge, though it read full. I kept listening for the radio, though the static never changed. And behind me, though the mirror showed nothing, I swore I could feel headlights, low and patient, following me without end. By the time I reached the next town, the tank read empty again, though I had filled it only hours ago. I rolled into a Shell station on fumes, shaking, hands gripping the wheel like claws. The kid at the counter didn't look up when I came in, didn't seem to notice how pale I was, how hard my heart was beating. "Long road," I muttered, more to myself than to him. He shrugged. "Nothing out that way. Folks get turned around sometimes. He'll play tricks on you. I wanted to tell him about the station, about the old man, about the 18-wheeler idling across the road like a carcass. But when I opened my mouth, nothing came out. The words just died in my throat. Because somehow some part of me knew that the man had been right. I hadn't made it there, not in a way anyone else would ever believe. And as I left that town behind, I knew the road wasn't done with me. And somewhere out there in the flat and empty dark, those headlights would find me again. On the stretch of Highway 21 between Caldwell and Bryan, there's a place most truckers refuse to stop at night. They'll cruise past with their eyes fixed on the yellow lines, radios turned down low as though acknowledging the thing out there makes it stronger. Some will mutter prayers under their breath. Some will just curse and press harder on the accelerator. It's a place that smells faintly of burnt rubber and something coppery, though no wreck has happened there in years. If you slow down, if you roll your windows down, you might catch the hiss of an idling engine that never runs out of fuel. And if you're truly unlucky, you'll see the rig. It's an old 18-wheeler, red once but now rust-bitten and dulled by decades of weather. The cab is jacked slightly to one side as though one axle has snapped, yet the engine ticks endlessly in a low, chugging rhythm. The trailer behind it is empty, its doors flung wide as though something big and desperate tore its way out long ago. The oddest thing, though, is the windshield. From the inside, white scars mar the glass, curling jagged marks that no man's hand could have carved. They fan upward and outward like something tried to claw its way free. Anyone who dares to climb the steps and pull open the driver's side door will hear the radio blaring nothing but static, sharp and wet like the sound of frying meat. The knob is broken off and no amount of slapping or pulling the cord makes the noise stop. The story goes that it belonged to a man named Hank Purvis, a long-haul driver who'd been running that route back in the early 80s. Folks around Caldwell remembered him for his frame, broad-shouldered, tough as railroad iron, and for the way he'd haul strange loads for cash. People swore they saw him driving in from Houston with tarps tied down over things that shifted and groaned. Some nights he'd roll into Bryan with the trailer rattling like something alive was trapped in there. Nobody asked questions because truckers often learn not to. But Hank, he wasn't right toward the end. He started parking that truck out by the rest stop just past Cook's Point, and he'd sit there, cab light glowing, staring through the windshield as if waiting for something. He'd turn the radio up so loud you could hear the static half a mile away. And one morning they found the rig just as it sits today, empty, still idling, Hank nowhere in sight. The sheriff's deputies who first responded quit within the year. They said they'd searched the fields and the trailer, that they'd seen the claw marks, that they'd even drained a stock tank nearby when a rancher complained of a smell like rotting meat coming from the water. They found nothing. Nothing of Hank, nothing of whatever had been in that trailer. Just the claw marks, the static, and the engine that refused to die even when they pulled the battery. They left it there because no tow company would touch it. One man tried, a guy out of Waco with a heavy-duty hauler, but when he chained the rig to his truck and tried to drag it, the chain snapped like fishing line. He swore the ground shook as though something deep below was holding the rig down. He quit the business after that. I stopped there once. I wish I hadn't. I was 23, trying to make it from Austin to College Station after a late shift at a warehouse. I was tired, bleary-eyed, and when I saw that dark shape by the roadside, I thought I could pull over and catch a nap. I cut the headlights and coasted to a stop beside it. At first, I didn't notice the idling, or maybe I just thought it was my own engine cooling down. But then I looked up and saw the glow through the cab windows. The truck's lights were dead, but something pale flickered inside. I climbed the steps and opened the door. The radio screamed static, louder than I could bear, and the smell hit me, thick and metallic like hot pennies in my nose. That's when I saw the windshield. I ran my hand over those grooves. They weren't scratches. They were gouges deep enough to splinter the glass but somehow never break it. The pattern curved like fingernails but thicker, rougher, as though something with hands but not human ones had scraped until its strength gave out. The seat was torn to shreds, stuffing hanging like entrails. The steering wheel was bent down at an angle impossible for human force. The floorboard was covered in dark stains, dried into the rubber mats. Not brown like old blood, but almost black, like oil mixed with something thicker. I swear I felt the seat shudder like someone had just shifted in it, and I stumbled back, knocking my head on the doorframe. The engine throbbed harder, revving on its own, and the static broke just for a second. I thought I heard a voice in it, not Hank's, but something low, guttural, speaking in a rhythm like words, but not any language I knew. My hands shook so bad I barely managed to slam the door shut. The glow inside flickered again, and just as I stepped back down onto the gravel, I saw a shape press against the inside of the windshield. It wasn't a face exactly, but the outline of one. Stretched long, the mouth opening wide enough to crack the glass. The claw marks flared white in the reflection of the dashboard light. Then the shape sank back into the dark. I got in my car and didn't look back until Brian, and even then the glow followed me in my mirrors, fading only as I hit the city lights. That was 15 years ago, but I still can't drive that stretch of 21 at night. People say sometimes you'll pass and the cab light will flicker on, even if you're speeding by at 70. They say if you roll your windows down, you'll hear the static chasing your tires until you're clear of that stretch. Some say Hank's still in there, caught between the glass and whatever he hauled out of Houston that final night. Others believe whatever was in the trailer never left, that it's still inside the truck, waiting for someone dumb enough to climb back in and sit down in that driver's seat. I know one thing. If you ever find yourself on that highway past midnight and hear an engine running where no engine should, don't stop, don't slow, and for God's sake, don't look too close at the windshield. Because sometimes if you do, something on the other side looks back. I first saw him standing in the grassy island between the northbound and southbound lanes of 183, where the frontage road peters out and the cedar breaks start to show their teeth. It was late, the sky the color of bruisewater and the heat still coming off the asphalt like a breathing thing. He was turned just so, angled into the wind, brim low over his brow, a dark suit that didn't belong to the temperature, and a scuffed briefcase held loose at his side. I passed him and kept passing and told myself it was nothing. Some eccentric, some office man whose car had died, some lost soul measuring the distance from one place to another by standing exactly between them. 10 minutes later, I saw him again. Same suit, same hat, same briefcase, same tilt of the shoulders. This time he was a little closer to my lane, near the cable barrier that shivers when the bigger rigs roll by. The dashboard clock clicked its soft minute forward, and the radio lost the Austin station and found a wavery country song out of Burnett. And I told myself that I had misjudged distance and had not seen what I thought I had seen. It is easy to talk yourself out of the obvious when you are alone and the dark feels like another person in the car. The third time I saw him was past the junction with 29, north of Liberty Hill, where the billboards thin out and the cicadas turn into a chorus so steady it sounds like electricity. He was standing in the median again, but turned more toward me, as if he heard the tires sing and wanted to hear better. I should have pulled off and shaken it loose with a cup of coffee at the all-night station near Bertram, but I told myself the simplest lie, which is that the world is too sensible to be strange for long. I work out of a small office in Cedar Park, selling storm-resistant windows to lots that sprout in caliche and dust like scrub oak after a fire. My territory runs up toward Lampasas, down toward Round Rock, west to Marble Falls. Highway, frontage road, 2-lane blacktop, then back to highway. There are weeks when my only conversations are with cashiers and homeowners, and the attendant at the car wash who sprays the bugs off my bumper like he is sluicing a crime scene. I eat at the Whataburger next to the tractor dealer more often than any reasonable man should. I know the smell of hot rubber, of curing asphalt, of cedar pollen turning the air into yellow fog. I tell you this so you know the difference when I tell you the smell that clung to the man was not any of those. The smell that came through the vents when I eased past him that third time was of damp paper and an old library stuck under a closed house in August. You might think you don't know that smell, but you do. It is the smell of something that wants to be read and has been kept shut too long. The sightings didn't stop after that. They multiplied. Some days I could drive to a meeting in Leander and not see him at all. Other days he would be there 3 times between the Mopac split and the county line. The last appearance so close to the white line that I felt the wheel twitch in my hands. He never lifted a hand, never moved a foot, never turned his head quite far enough for me to see past the brim, but he edged closer, the way you inch a chair toward a locked door. I tried telling Eli about it, the only person at the office I could stand to be around after 5. He was a transplant from Lubbock, worked numbers and calendars better than he worked people. And he had that dry humor you find here, the kind that comes up out of the soil like limestone. He laughed without malice and said long drives make mirrors out of bad ideas. He told me about the time he thought he saw his dead uncle on the shoulder of 84 outside Post, and how it turned out to be a feed sack twisted around a T-post. I nodded and pretended it helped. It did not. Within a week, I stopped mentioning the man entirely. My dog started waking early and pacing the length of the back fence. He is a quiet mutt, half border collie, half good intentions. And his bark is a thing he saves for real arguments. One morning around 3, I heard the gravel in the drive shift as if a foot had tested the weight of it. The air conditioner kicked, my dog froze, and the hair along his back prickled like he was plugged into a socket. I went to the window and lifted the blind with 2 fingers and found the yard empty, except for the angled shadows of the crepe myrtles. When I exhaled, I could see it on the glass like a small cloud. It was too warm in the house to fog a window. He started showing up off the highway too, but only in places that were cousins to it. I would catch him in the reflection of the gas station window while the pump clacked in my hand, not standing in front of me, but standing where the lanes divided behind me. I would pull into the Dairy Queen in Lampasas for a cone and see him in the red glare of taillights on the access road, not moving, not begging, just there. Once, on the long bridge across Lake Buchanan, he appeared in a series of stuttered images as if the guardrail slats were frames in which someone had chosen to trap one still figure over and over. The wind was up and the lake had that gunmetal chop it gets in fall. I felt something like pressure in my ears and realized my jaw was clenched so hard it ached. I tried to catch him with my phone, but every picture turned into an unhelpful study in motion blur and glare. I bought a dash cam, installed it, and made myself drive the old route past the worst places. The footage shows medians full of brown grass and bent signs and the shimmer of heat and nothing else. My eyes were seeing something my machines refused to register, and that should have comforted me. It did not. The first time he occupied a space that wasn't outdoors, I was in the elevator of a mid-rise in Cedar Park, heading up to a contractor who had promised 6 referrals if I could beat a quote out of San Antonio. The elevator shuddered and stopped at 3. The doors parted, and there he was on the landing. I saw the hat brim first, the black ribbon, the damp dark at the cuff of the trousers. The briefcase hung from his hand, and the leather had started to craze at the corners like dry riverbeds. No one else seemed to notice. A woman in scrubs stood beside me, yawning behind her knuckles, and a kid played a game on his phone with the sound up. Little bursts and chimes and cartoon applause. I could smell the paper again, and something else underneath it, something like the creosote you get on fence posts. The doors closed, and when they opened again at 5, he was not there. But the smell took a long time to die, like a match burned down to the nail. I started reading the Lampasas Dispatch and the Burnett Bulletin like an old man looking for names of people he used to know. If you're looking, you can always convince yourself a particular road collects more wrecks than it should. But the stories did not line up with my fear. There were accidents, yes. A toppled cattle trailer near Briggs, a lost load of sheetrock on the curve before Inks Lake, a deer that jumped wrong, a low-speed fender bender that turned into a shoving match at a stoplight. Nothing that stitched itself into a pattern I could trace. I wanted a ghost with a biography, a man who had a name and a date and a reason to stand in middles. Instead, all I had was a figure dressed for an old job in weather that did not deserve a jacket. I told myself to take a week off, go to Galveston, sit on the seawall, watch pelicans. That is what reasonable men do with unreasonable feelings. Then the detour went up on 183. Some resurfacing near Andis rerouted us all onto the old 2 lanes that cut north like scars. And if I wanted to make my meetings, I had to get back on the highway where I did not want to be. I told myself that a week of absence had cured me of nerves. That is the second simplest lie, which is that time heals what it cannot understand. The storm hit as I crested the rise past 3405. The sky went a hard slate. Then the rain came in a sheet that made the wiper blades look like they were wiping a memory, rather than water. The big truck started throwing wakes into the far lane, and the rumble strips did their little alarm buzz every time my tire kissed them. The radio fizzed and died. I eased into the right lane, put on the hazards, and watched for the glow of the detour signs. When the lightning came, it was in low, fat flashes that lit the world up with the ugly honesty of a hospital room. He was there, far ahead and then suddenly near and then near enough that the briefcase was more than a prop. The leather looked wet. The handle looked like it was leaving a dark mark on his palm. He faced me without lifting his chin, and a thought came to me that was so absurd, so specific that I almost said it aloud in the empty car. He was waiting for me to pull over. He had been waiting a long while. I drove past him with the care you bring to the edge of any cliff. The rain turned loose for a minute, and a line of white geese moved through the ditch like patient ghosts. The highway should have ended where the detour began, but the next sign wasn't where it lived last week. The GPS took on that cheerful tone that sounds like it knows a secret and began to suggest a U-turn. I followed the curve of the road and came back into the long straight I had just passed. On the shoulder, abandoned by some fool who thought he could make it to the next exit, sat a muddy Corolla with its flashers ticking like a metronome for bad decisions. As I came level with it, I saw the man again. Same spot, same angle. I touched the brake with the ball of my foot and felt the car list, felt it settle back. The distance between what I knew and what the road insisted on had become a measurable thing. The third loop snapped whatever thread of denial I had left. I pulled onto the gravel wedge that separates the lanes before the bridge toward the creek and eased the car to a stop. The rain softened, the way storms do when they are rolling out beyond you to make trouble for another town. I put the car in park and listened to the engine tick. When I opened the door, the smell of the wet median hit me first. Not the clean smell you get after a thunderhead pushes dust out of the air, but the blunt smell of trampled grass and old paper. I shut the door behind me and stepped onto the narrow strip of gravel between two worlds moving in opposite directions. Up close, he was taller than I had made him in my mind. The hat was a style that doesn't get worn much now. Too narrow for the big cowboy crowns, you see. Too honest to be fashion. His suit was good fabric, the kind that keeps a crease even after heat has tried to melt it into something else. The cuffs were damp. The briefcase had a scar across one side as if it had once skidded across asphalt. He did not look up as I came close. His posture had the patient sag of a man who has learned to let the day pass through him. When I was near enough to touch the case, he spoke, and his voice was the size of the space between two lanes of highway. "You passed me," he said. "Then you passed me again." "What do you want?" I said. It came out harsher than I meant and smaller. He turned his head just enough for the brim to show me a mouth that was neither smiling nor set to anger. "I want you to know what you are doing when you pass a thing in the middle and tell yourself it belongs there." He lifted the briefcase toward me. I did not move to take it, because it looked heavy in a way that had nothing to do with weight. He raised it a little more. The clasp was a brass tongue. Without him having to touch it, it clicked. Inside were papers. They were all the same size and all the same kind. Photocopies printed on cheap stock, the edges ruffled with damp. There were typed reports, maps of familiar curves marked with familiar mile markers, black and white photographs of familiar stretches of grass. A smell came off them that made my eyes sting, as if the pages themselves did not want to be opened to the air. He did not look down into the case while he held it open. He looked at me. The first photograph was of the median south of Briggs, where the guardrail ends before the next run of cable. The point where the grass has a dip in it from trucks that have bounced wrong. There was nothing in the picture except the dip, but the camera had forced attention on it, had made a portrait of the whole the way you might make a portrait of a face. The second photograph was of the bridge over the creek where I had pulled over. In the shot there was a shadow near the posts that could have been a man or could have been a trick of light. The third was of the shoulder of FM 2657 where it cuts back toward Copper's Cove. The white paint of the line had a smear in it. I understood then that these were not records of one thing that had happened. They were records of a habit. "You have been seeing me for months," he said, "but you only came into the middle when the road bent wrong for you." "I don't hit people," I said. It sounded like a child's defense even as it left my mouth. I wanted to put my hands in my pockets and could not. "I don't drive drunk. I don't text behind the wheel. I'm not that man." His tone did not change. "Do you remember the day the truck in front of you lost a strap and the ladder slid into the right lane? Do you remember the way you swerved into the median to avoid it and never mentioned how your tires dragged a ditch? Do you remember the woman whose sedan twitched when it hit that ditch an hour later? Do you remember how you told yourself there was no way to know if the ditch was the cause?" I did remember the latter. I remembered the drumming of my heart and the way I laughed afterward with the kind of relief that feels like getting away with something. I did not remember a woman. But even as I tried to conjure the shape of her in my mind, the smell of paper swelled, and the rain briefly thickened and hissed in the grass. He tilted the briefcase and a page slid up from the stack as if some small wind was trapped inside and wanted out. There was a name on that page and a date and a polite summary that did not accuse anyone of anything. My own car was listed as a witness vehicle. I had not given my name. I had kept driving. "There are men for every place," he said. When a corner keeps claiming bumpers, someone stands there and watches. When a bridge hums wrong, someone listens to it. When a stretch of grass between opposites gets told by traffic where to be, someone holds those instructions. He lifted the briefcase another inch and my hands moved because that is what hands do. When something offered does not leave room for refusing. The weight wasn't terrible. I had carried heavier. The shoulder strap was cracked, but it held. When my fingers closed around the handle, the wet of it soaked into my skin in an instant. It felt like what you feel when you shake the hand of a man who has just come in out of the rain. "Why me?" I asked. He shrugged the smallest shrug I have ever seen. "You are the one who looked," he said. "Most people drive with their eyes pointed toward where they wish they were. You drive with your eyes pointed into the space between where you are and where everyone else is. It is not a virtue. It is a debt." He stepped back, one shoe making a print in the mud and the other finding a dry clump that held his weight. He put his hands in his pockets and lifted his face into the wind the way people do when they are smelling who they used to be. I waited for instructions. He gave none. The briefcase pulled on my arm in a steady way like a small dog on a leash. The cars hissed by, indifferent. Somewhere down the line, a horn called out in the rain. I looked across the southbound lanes toward the cedar thicket, and then back across the northbound lanes toward the slow glow of my own car sitting with its hazards blinking in a persimmon rhythm. When I looked again at the man, he was gone. This is not the part where I tell you something exploded or that I woke in a hospital or that weeks passed and I cannot account for them. I kept standing where I was. The rain let go for good. The sun pushed a hard brightness through the edge of the clouds. A hawk came low across the median and lifted up with a twist of its neck when it felt whatever I felt. I did not feel trapped. I did not feel free. I felt the way you feel the first morning after you have decided to live better, which is not better at all, only aware. I waited until the gap in traffic was big enough for a man with a heavy case. I crossed the lanes and climbed into my car and set the briefcase on the passenger seat. I drove to Lampasas and made my call. I closed the sale because that is what muscle memory does when your mind is busy. I stopped at Heb and bought coffee and paper towels and a pack of cheap work gloves because my hands still felt wet no matter how dry they were. When I got home, I put the briefcase on the table and stared at it until the dog refused to relax in the room with it. Then I opened it and I read. The papers were not all about accidents. Some were about near misses. Some were about the slow erosion of a shoulder that made the first raindrop a liar. Some were about the way a certain morning sun made a certain curve into a trick mirror. There were notes written in a careful hand that might have been from any decade in the last 60 years. There were drawings of the kind a surveyor makes when the official map does not show the thing the eye knows. At the bottom of the stack, there was a photograph of a man in a suit and a hat. His hat was not like mine. His face was turned away. He stood ankle-deep in median grass with a briefcase in his hand, and he looked like a messenger between two kingdoms that did not want to acknowledge each other. For several nights, I dreamed of the median as if it were a room in a house. In the dream, I moved the furniture, which was to say I walked the line where the grass divided and the noise of passing changed timbre like a chord. In the morning, I would wake with the sound of tires in my ears and the certainty that I needed to be somewhere between two places. I started leaving early. I started stopping where the grass told me to stop. Sometimes I did nothing but stand. Sometimes I picked up pieces of shredded tire and moved them far enough away from the lane that they could not reach anyone else. Sometimes I called the county and told them a reflector post was down. A few times I waited until a lost load was collected. Once, just after dawn, I waved my arm at a teenager who had wandered too close to the white and frightened him back into a car he did not yet deserve to drive. I did not wear a suit. I wore the shirt I had, and a hat that kept the sun off and the gloves that kept the heat out of my palms. And the briefcase, which never got lighter no matter how many papers I carried away to be filed in the bin, I started keeping under the bed. You think I am making this sound noble. It was not. Sometimes drivers shouted. Sometimes they honked not in warning but in contempt. More often they did not see me at all and I could have been a post. The county workers eyed me the way dogs eye a stray that might bite. Eli asked if I was all right and I said I was, and it came out too fast. The dog got used to the smell. I did not. It clung to the house in a way that made the kitchen feel like a windowless room in a courthouse. I took to brewing coffee at all hours because it was the only smell that could shoulder it aside. The briefcase lived by the front door. Sometimes, for a handful of heartbeats after I set it down, I could hear the soft sliding of paper inside as if a slow breath were turning the pages. A month after the storm, the heat broke with one of those blue northers that make the sky look new. I drove out past Briggs and parked on the caliche apron of a ranch road and crossed to the median, because that is where I go now when I do not know where else to be. The grass had faded to the color of straw. The wind put a ripple in it that made it seem like something alive shifting in its sleep. I stood there with the briefcase hanging from my hand and watched the long bodies of the trucks move past me, as if they were a single animal your mind could not hold all at once. After a while, a sedan pulled onto the shoulder. A woman got out. She was middle-aged, sharp-shouldered, a schoolteacher or a nurse you would not joke with. She came to the edge of the lane and looked at me with her hand at her mouth. I lifted the briefcase a fraction, and something old played through her face, surprise and recognition, and a fear that had nothing to do with me. She came no closer, but she nodded and I nodded, and she got back into her car and drove away carefully. I do not know what that was. It is not for me to know. There are stretches of highway in this state that hold their own weather. There are places where when you step out of your car, you step onto someone else's story. If you don't want that, you can drive the long way and hope the back roads won't ask anything of you. The work of the median is not to haunt anyone. It is to honor the small corrections we owe the places we pass. I have learned how to see the shallow rut that becomes an apology. I have learned that some ghosts are not dead people, but obligations that have been out in the elements too long. I have learned that you can stand in the middle and still feel the pull of the right lane like a hand on your arm. On good days, I sell 2 replacements and a triple-paned upgrade, and go home in time to throw a tennis ball for the dog. On bad days, the briefcase drags at me so hard I sit in a parking lot with the engine running and convince myself to step out. I do not know how long this goes on. The man did not tell me the term. I do not know if someone will take the case from me on a day it rains so hard the highway folds back onto itself, or if I will set it down one night and find it won't come through the door any longer. I do not know what I will be to the people who pass me and do not look. Maybe I have already become a repetition for some other driver, a fixed point on a route they tell their friends about as a way of making fun of their own nerves. Maybe I am the man they pass once and then again and then again. If that is so, I cannot correct it. The work is not to be believed. The work is to stand where 2 directions argue and remind both of them there is something between them that is not theirs to claim. When the sun sets just right on the stretch near the lake, the shadows of the cable barrier throw long stripes across the road and the median looks like a page lined for writing. On those evenings, I think of the papers in the case and the ones I have added, the neat notes of places where the world tried and failed to be simple. I think of the day the ladder fell and the swerving and the laugh and the way guilt does not always announce itself until it has a task to hand you. I think of the man who waited so patiently in his good suit. I pass him sometimes now in the rear view, a figure just far enough away to belong to distance. Then I see him again, closer, and I nod at him the way working people nod. Once more and he is beside me, hat brim just low enough to keep the sun off his eyes. I don't ask him anything. He does not ask me anything. We stand in the middle and count the cars and listen for the change in the sound that means someone needs to be told, with a gesture or a phone call, that the road is not a promise. When the light goes and the wind slides across the grass with that old paper smell, I close the case and carry it home so it does not turn into a thing the night might try to keep. The first time I heard the breathing, it was past midnight on a weekday, the kind of hour when the border towns give up their last noises and tuck them under the horizon. I was driving a county surplus tow truck that drank more oil than gas, hauling a wrecked Corolla back toward Laredo from a ranch road north of Highway 83. The heat had been hard all day. It lay on the pavement like a blanket even in the dark. I had the windows cracked and the radio tuned to a sports call-in that kept fading. The towers out there never behaved the way they were supposed to. I remember watching the red aviation lights blink across the mesquite and wondering where the sky ended, since the ground had gone black. I had a habit then of taking Mines Road when I could, the long, unspooling way along the river where the warehouses slept with their sodium lamps on. That night I chose 83 instead, thinking I would cut back by Lake Casablanca and be home before 2. I passed the last gas station with a busted ice cooler out front and a faded sign advertising tacos I knew weren't made there. I passed a border patrol checkpoint dark for the night, the cones stacked in a pyramid. I passed a ranch gate wrapped with chain where a plastic bag fluttered like a trapped ghost. The night sat deep in the low places, and in the high places it shimmered faintly with heat. The steering wheel was full of the road. My phone said no service, then found a bar, then lost it again, and I tapped it with my thumb as if that changed anything. The air changed. That is the only way I can begin to say it. It wasn't a drop in temperature or a shift in smell. Those things came later. The air went empty. You do not think air has a body until it walks out of the room. And then the room is the same size and full of the same visible things, yet suddenly unoccupied. My headlights spread in front of me, but the light felt thinner, as if the beams had grown skittish. The radio lost its station and stuck on a stranger's voice for half a second. Something in Spanish that wasn't words. The engine did a small cough. The kind of hiccup an old truck will give if it is spoiled and wants attention. And then the power fell away from the pedal. I heard the pitch of the alternator drop like a yawn. The dashboard lights went from bright to a sleepy dim. The phone screen died in my palm as if it were a candle pinched between wet fingers. My foot went to the brake because there was nothing else to do. The truck rolled and rolled until it found a soft shoulder of caliche and settled there with a long exhale through the radiator. The night came on in full. A cottonmouth of fear wound itself around my spine. I sat there and listened. When you lose the engine and the radio in your phone, you think you will hear the crickets. You think you will hear the highway and the small noises that never leave a Texas night. You do not think you will hear breathing. Not at first. Not until you realize that the quiet has a rhythm. In, out. It is not yours. You hold your breath to be sure. And the in keeps happening and the out keeps happening, as steady as a sleeping animal's lungs. I waited for the trick to reveal itself. I waited for my own heartbeat to resolve into the answer. But the breathing came from outside the cab and under the hood and from the ditch and from the wide flat road that ran away into darkness in both directions. It came from the asphalt itself. I put my hand on the wheel and felt the faintest tremor, as if the world under me had the hiccups. My first thought was batteries, alternator, wiring harness. I talk myself down with explanations, and it usually works. But the explanations needed devices, and devices had gone quiet around me like a row of birds lifting together from a fence. I turned the key and got nothing. I tried the emergency radio I keep under the seat, the old one with a crank you wind like a toy. The crank spun out on a ratchet click and the tiny green light warmed, and then it spat a crackle like dry grass and gave up. I was alone. Highway 83 is never truly empty. If you sit long enough, you will get a trucker or a county deputy or a rancher coming home late. The night delivered a set of headlights a mile down, and I felt relief so strong my hands trembled. The relief didn't last. The other vehicle came into the dead air the same way I had, and its light stuttered as if it had blinked. The engine tone fell as it slowed, then died. The glow from its dash went out the way a life goes out in a hospital. The driver coasted to the opposite shoulder, and the two of us sat there facing the same direction, separated by a ribbon of hot blacktop that was breathing. I opened the door because there was nothing else to do. The breathing felt heavier outside, as if the night were pressing its face against my skin. I called out, but my voice sounded ridiculous in that kind of silence, like a small animal barking at a river. The other driver opened his door and stood with the shape of his hands on his hips, and after a minute he crossed to me along the white line that always feels narrower on foot. "Usted lo oye?" he said. "You hear it?" His accent was local. He wore a feed store cap and a t-shirt advertising a barbecue place in Zapata. He smelled faintly of diesel. "Yes," I said. "How long have you been hearing it?" "Long enough." He looked at my truck, then up at the sky, then back at the black ribbon. "This part," he said. "Always this part." He told me his name was Raul and that he hauled soft drink syrup up and down from the warehouses by the river. He had been taking this stretch since before I was born. He said he avoided it when he could. But the direct routes save hours, and hours turned into money, and money turned into his son's braces and the mortgage in San Ignacio. There were stretches, he said, where the electronics didn't work right. It had started small years back, as if the problem were a mouse in the walls that you tried not to think about. A radio cut, a phone call that dropped without reason. You made a sign of the cross and kept going. It got worse last year. He had lost power 3 times in the same spot. He had reported it to the county. He had checked with the guys at the wrecker yards. He had asked the sheriff's office if there were some kind of military test going on, some radar or jamming. Nobody shrugged the same way twice. but nobody came out with a meter and set it on the road and said, "This is what it is." I put my palm flat on the white line beside my boot and tried not to feel like a man touching a hot stove. The breathing was there in the paint as it was in the tar and the gravel underneath. I meant to impress Raoul with calm. I meant to say something about a geomagnetic anomaly. I meant to say there were places in Mexico where compasses went wrong because of iron in the hills. Instead, I told him I could not hear the cicadas. He cocked his head for the same reason, and we both stood there with our mouths closed as if we were in church. A slight wind raised the hairs on my forearms. The wind died in an instant, not fading but arrested. The breathing did not change. It came from the center of the slab, not the shoulders, not the bar ditch, right down the middle where the tires ride. Raoul must have heard the same thing because he stepped away from it. I stayed where I was and placed both hands down on the road, stupid as that was, and lowered my ear to it like a man listening for a train on a track in a movie. The heat in the pavement came up into the cartilage of my ear and began to whisper something like a secret, something like a slow apology. In, out. I could not say how deep it went. It felt like the lungs were the size of a county. I do not like to be watched. I have never liked it. Perhaps I cracked then because I felt a regard, not hostile at first, just present, a recognition going the other way. I sat up quickly and my hand skinned on the rough aggregate and left a good dark smear. Raoul told me not to put my head on it again. He told me his cousin had done that and had not slept for a week and then drove out one night alone and did not come back. He told me these things in a low trainer's voice, like he was trying not to startle a horse. We tried the usual things. We popped hoods and looked at batteries like there is a language spoken by engine bays and we would remember enough to speak it. We checked fuses with a penlight that died for no reason other than it was being watched. I put my hand on the distributor cap and I could feel that animal breathe through the metal. The hoses sat warm in my fingers as if blood were running through them. I laughed then because I laugh when I am near the place where fear breaks and the next thing happens. Raoul did not laugh. He told me he had jumper cables and I told him I did too. And then we looked at the dead cords like snakes that might bite if we woke them. Another set of headlights came and died. This one was a white sedan with rental stickers on the windows and a woman in the driver's seat clutching a steering wheel like a life preserver. She rolled to a stop behind Raoul and put on her hazard lights and the hazards did not blink. She sat very still. The breathing deepened by the width of a hair. She stepped out carefully and did not take her eyes off the painted line like it was a tightrope. The three of us stood together and nodded the way. Strangers nod in an emergency when the thing they share is not words. We tried to push Raoul's truck with the three of us. And it pushed easy as a boat at first, and then it pushed like a boat on sand, and then it did not push at all. The barrier was sudden and exact as if we had hit something invisible. The three of us leaned into the back of the soft drink truck and the truck leaned toward us and the soles of our shoes found the sand and scraped it. The breathing didn't change. We let it go. It rolled back a foot and settled as if a hand had set it down. I had a thought then that I am ashamed of and tell anyway. I thought about the woman. I thought about the way fear changes a room and found out that the room in me has a window I do not like. The breathing had taken on a cadence that felt human. The pauses between in and out had grown shaped. A body regulates itself in sleep and the pauses stack all the same. This thing in the road was not like that. It adjusted as we moved. It adjusted when we spoke or stopped speaking. It found a way to keep time with us. That was when the shame weighed less than the need. I asked the woman to stand by my truck while Raoul and I looked for a marker post I thought I had seen an eighth of a mile back. She looked at me and then she looked at Raoul and then she said she would stay with the trucks because she was not foolish. I was relieved that she thought me foolish. It meant I could still hear myself. We did not fetch any marker post. We walked away from the dead air and the breathing and left the woman. And perhaps that makes us small as men, but I think if you had been there you would have known how the edges pull at you. The farther we got, the better we could hear small, normal sounds. Crickets returned like a radio station slipping back into range. A dog barked from a ranchlet somewhere toward the river. A moth tapped my cheek as if to scold me. We turned and saw the three vehicles sitting quiet as coffins in a row, and the woman pacing between them the way an animal paces its pen. We kept walking, and the walking felt like a sin, and we kept walking anyway. The breathing faded. The night got busy with itself again. The command simple as a road sign rose into my mind. Do not turn back. We found a hill where the cell tower appeared as 3 red dots and my phone shook itself awake. Raul's did too. I called the sheriff's office and gave them the mile marker I guessed, and the dispatcher on the night desk said we were the 4th call this month from that stretch. She said they had sent a unit 2 nights ago and the deputy's cruiser had gone strange, and he had waited a quarter mile away and watched the road breathe for 20 minutes. She said she would send someone if they had anyone close. She said something else and the phone cut in the middle of it with a clean finality. Raul looked like he wanted to spit and couldn't find the moisture in his mouth. We went back because the woman was there. We found the trucks where we left them, and the woman leaning in a way that made my heart go small. She had placed both hands on the center crown of the road and lowered her face to it. I shouted, a stupid raw sound that shattered against the silence like a bottle. She did not move. Raul ran in the way older men run, and his boot skidded on smooth rock and he went down hard on his hip. I reached her and hauled her back by the elbows. Her skin was hot and dry. She did not resist. Her eyes were closed and her mouth was open, and the sound that came out of it matched the road. I shook her like a fool and her mouth hung open and her chest rose and fell, and then she found my face with a hand and placed her fingers along my jaw and whispered a name that was not mine. She took 2 more breaths and then her chest stopped. Her mouth stayed open. The road inhaled. That is what I will say, and I know how it sounds. It inhaled. It took a breath that needed her, and when it had it, her shoulders went slack and her head fell in a way that tells you the string is cut. Raul made a sound like a sob, and the sound had no echo. I counted. I am a coward, but I can count. I pressed my fingers to her neck and counted to 10 and then to 20 and then to a number in between that I do not remember. The road exhaled and her lungs did not. We dragged her to the caliche shoulder because that was something to do. I did not think about what would happen in the heat if we left her there. I only knew I could not leave her on the center line. Raul began to pray and the words stayed inside his mouth. His lips moved and nothing came out because there was no air for it. I got behind my truck and put my shoulder to the metal, and it felt right to do so. And it did not move. I heard myself breathe, a little harsh. The road heard it too. It made a choice and so did I. You can breathe wrong on purpose. Try it now in a place where the air is yours. Force your chest into a cadence that is ugly and uneven. Take a long breath and 2 short ones. Skip the next one. Mistime it with your own heart. It feels like walking downstairs where there should be 1 more step. It makes the world tilt. I did that. I did it hard. I breathed off the beat of whatever had decided to keep time with me. Raul stared at me as if I had broken a rule no one hangs on the wall. The road inhaled and I did not. The road exhaled and I took a ragged breath across it. The trucks made a noise like an old man clearing his throat. The engine turned. 1 cough, 1 more. It did not start, but it spun. My penlight flickered back to life and then died again, but that flicker was enough. Raul understood. He put his hands on his own chest as if he were adjusting something inside him, and he made himself a bad metronome. It hurt to do it. It made us both pant like dogs in July. It was shameful and necessary. The trucks complained in sympathy. The woman lay in the ditch like an accusation in a white blouse. There is a thing about choices. You make them for reasons that make sense in the moment, and later you turn the reasons over in your hands and find new shapes. We left her there. Raul said her family would have her name on a ring or a tag, and the deputy would come and he would see the 3 vehicles and he would find her. He said the road would not let her be lost because it wanted a witness. I do not know where he learned that sentence. I only know that we did not lift her, and in not lifting her we told ourselves we were being careful of whatever might be in the asphalt. We got behind our wheels. I turned the key in a rhythm that did not belong in my chest, and the engine turned when the road exhaled and turned again, and caught with a shuddering willingness that scared me as much as anything. Raul's rig responded the same way. We did not look at each other when we drove away. The breathing followed the trucks to the edge of the dead air like a dog follows you to the gate and stops because the yard is done. It let us cross the threshold, and then the night came back and the radio found a preacher from San Antonio talking about the spirit, and I shut it off because I did not want words telling me anything. We went to the sheriff's office in the morning and we gave our names and our statements and we said what we had done and what we had not done. They sent a unit and another after it. They found the white sedan, and the woman lying in the ditch with her arms folded across her ribs the way the living fold their arms when the heat takes them. They did not put a cause on the report you can read. Her family flew down and asked the sky for an answer, and the sky lay there and the heat stayed. I stayed away from that stretch. I had a kid to put through school, and I had a wife who could see the worst in me when I came home at dawn and did not tell the whole truth. I sold the tow truck and took a job in a warehouse where the night is the size of 4 walls instead of a county. A year went by, then another. The breathing did not visit me in dreams. It visited me in small rooms when the AC cut out and the lights hummed and I could not hear my own name clearly. And I would find myself measuring my chest, counting out the seconds, breaking the beat when I felt watched. It is hard to describe how living with a thing does not make it lighter. I went to church again for a few months and the hymns were a relief because someone else carried the air for me. I stopped again because relief is not an answer. I worked. My kid left for San Marcos and sent pictures of a river with clear water. The heat came early the next summer and did not leave. 2 weeks ago I got a call from Raul's son. He told me Raul had not come home. He told me his father had switched to nights because of the traffic and because the heat is worse in the day. He told me his father had not been answering his phone, had not answered the dispatch radio, had not been on the CB with his friends who run the syrup and the corn syrup and the sweeteners along those lanes. He told me the last ping they had on the tracking was a little south of a checkpoint that sleeps at night and breathes just the same. He told me the highway there had a name that people do not say out loud in the daylight. He asked me if I thought maybe he had a flat. He asked me if I thought maybe his father had just got tired and pulled over and fallen asleep, because that happens. He asked me if I thought any kind thing. I did not say the thing I knew. I drove out there in my pickup, the good blue one I bought when I stopped hauling other people's broken cars. I put a jug of water on the passenger seat and a rosary I had kept for years, though I did not use it. I drove past the gas station with the soft freezer rattling and the handmade signs. I drove past the lake that looks like a promise when the wind is right. I drove to the place where the cell signal dips and the road lifts a little, and the air changed. It was right where it had always been. My engine struggled and then died and the phone shut itself like a tired eye. The night came into the cab and sat with me. I could hear in that first kill of noise a second engine cooling down. It ticked out the warmth the way an oven does. I climbed out and walked along the white line and saw the silhouette of a soft drink truck, parked sideways like it had tried to make a U and been stopped by an idea. I knew the dent on the rear bumper. I knew the sticker peeling on the right. I knew the cigarette smell on the wind that belonged to Raul even after months. I walked around and his door was open and his flashlight lay on the step, and his hat had fallen and flattened like a bird. I did not say his name. I had learned something about names. I could hear him in the breathing. Not as a voice, not as a word. I could hear a cadence that was not the one I carried. I could hear that the thing in the road had grown used to him. Breathing with a partner changes you. Ask a couple that has slept in the same bed for 30 years. Their lungs learn to dial each other around the corners of the night. I put my hands on my chest and I did the thing that had saved me once. I made my breathing ugly and out of time and it hurt. The road inhaled and I put my breath somewhere else. The road exhaled and I kept mine bottled. The trucks murmured. The small light in the dash flickered like a dying firefly. I could feel the road watching through the soles of my boots. It is an odd feeling, being weighed by a surface you stand on. I tried to open Raul's door farther and it stuck on something that felt like a hand, and I yanked and it came away and hit me in the shin, and I did not swear. I leaned into the cab the way I had leaned into the world for years and found the seat empty. The breathing does not only take. That is what I learned then. It learns you. It sets a hook and keeps tension on it, soft as a fishing line trailing behind a boat at dusk. You feel it when you walk down a grocery aisle and the fridges hum. You feel it when the classroom clock ticks at a rate that is almost your own. You feel it most of all when you are alone and the air seems normal and your chest settles into a beat that is not entirely yours.
It is patient.
It can wait years. It can wait through marriages and jobs and the time it takes for a son to call with a voice that sounds like his father's voice at 19. I stood there with my hand on Raul's wheel and his hat under my shoe, and I knew what was going to happen because the simple answer had been sitting at the edge of my mind since the night with the woman in the white sedan. You can breathe wrong for a while. You can fight a metronome with a poor drummer's stubbornness. You cannot do it forever. The body wants a pattern. The road does not tire. I took the rosary from around my wrist and put it over the gear shift. It hung there in a way that made one bead rest against the plastic, and I felt better because sometimes it helps to plant a flag no matter how small. I said his name then. I said it once softly, and the breathing paused the way a body pauses when you say its name in the dark. Then it resumed with a patience that stripped me. I left the door open and walked back to my truck as if that would change the outcome. I am telling this the way you would tell someone why you do not swim in a lake after dusk. I am telling it like a warning, and it is not one. A warning is what you give when the thing can be avoided with care, and there is no care that keeps you from error. The highway of silence is not a place on a map. It is a habit that lives in a stretch of pavement where the heat lays down, and the steel wires in the concrete hum, and the wind forgets to move. It is a teacher. It wants students. It does not argue. It waits while you tire yourself out performing little acts of will, and it forgives you when you fail and forgives you again, and then asks you to lie down for a moment and listen. If you are still a long time and quiet, you can hear the people it is taught. They are not speaking. They are breathing together. I drove out of that dead air before dawn by breaking myself again and then again, until I crossed the line where the crickets held their concert, and the tape hiss of the world came back, and the engine became my friend. I should have gone to the office with the flags and the seal and the bulletproof glass and set everything in order, and been sent to sit in the lobby, while a deputy called me sir and wrote my name. I should have done what the day requires. I did not. I drove home. I showered with water that had warmed in the pipes all night. I stood in my kitchen with a towel on my shoulders like a priest stole, and I listened to the refrigerator. It took a breath. It let it go. It did it again. It matched me and I matched it. I slept. When I woke, the first thing I heard was breathing, not mine. I lay still. I counted 10 and then 20 and then a number in between. I tried to break the pattern. I managed it for 10 breaths, and then my chest rolled back into the rhythm like a cart finding its rut on a ranch road. I got up. I drove to a store and bought a new flashlight with batteries that promised long life and a handful of candles, because at some point, you decide to light the dark with something the dark recognizes. I drove south as the sun fell into the brush and the highway turned the color of old pennies. The trucks pulling produce out of Mexico passed with steady hunger. I set my jaw and I did not make myself ugly with breath. I let myself fall into the count of the road. The air changed as it does. The engine gave itself up as it does. The phone closed its eye as it does. The breathing accepted me, happy to have me back, content as a dog when you come home. I parked where I belonged. I got out and the heat wrapped me. I put my hands flat on the road and I lowered my ear. I said Raul's name without a word. He answered me without a word. He took a breath. I took one too. The highway of silence was never about silence. It is about a lesson you will learn whether you mean to or not. And when you learn it, you will teach it to the next person who breaks down in the wrong place and calls out in a human voice for help that requires a human face. If you have driven out there and come back, you know already. If you have not, then someday the windbreaker you keep hanging over the back of the passenger seat will lift without a draft. The radio will die without static. Your chest will stumble trying to find the beat, and then it will settle into a pattern that tastes like wet limestone and hot paint, and the faint sweetness of cane syrup. You will hear it. You will hold your breath to prove it is not you. You will wait and the breathing will go on. Kindly as a teacher, patient as a debt. You will feel watched. You will put your ear to the road. You will hear the people you have not met who have been breathing there a long time. One of them is me. I am there now, counting under the sound, steady as a big animal at rest, waiting for you to come to the place where everything goes quiet and we can be together, in and out, as long as it takes.